Welcome everyone today to the August 1st edition of Update on the War in the Ukraine. My name is Jim Dingeman. I'm joined on the air with Darryl McPherson, Frank Radford, and Dennis Goldstein. Well, first let's talk about what we see was reported today. President Biden went on the air to announce that Ahmed al-Zawahiri was killed in Kabul by a drone strike. And this was the breaking news today. He went on for 49 minutes. I'm not going to play that. I'm just going to throw up a piece that occurred today confirming that they killed him over the weekend. Basically, justice has been delivered. They had tracked him to a home in downtown Kabul where he was hiding out with his family. And this strike was carried out over the weekend by the CIA, and he's now dead. Now, Ahmed al-Zawahiri, of course, was a senior leader in Al-Qaeda. I believe he took over Al-Qaeda after Osama bin Laden was killed. And I'll stop right there because I did not watch the press conference. So why don't we start? Frank, what did you see today about this, or what's your impressions of what happened?
I was just talking to Darryl about that. It's similar to the Soleimani strike, and it's in Kabul and, right under the noses of the Taliban. So how was it done? That's interesting. It says it's CIA. If it's a drone strike, there was recently a element opposed to Taliban working out of the Panjshir Valley again, and an adjacent valley. It could have been with assistance, sort of radio relay or whatever in those areas with CIA contacts on the ground, possibly. I don't know. Or it was done just by the sophistication of our technology. We can do it from a distance. But anyway, that's just a postulation. I think it was justified. I think. Considering what he was and what he did, and we've designated him as a terrorist, and most of the world has sort of concurred with that. Now, Soleimani, you could have more of an argument, but definitely I'm pretty comfortable that this was a good strike. But there's a tackiness to it as well. Is Biden going to sit down and start gloating over it, just prior to midterms? Was the strike sort of orchestrated from that point of view? That's tacky, but it's done, and I think it's a good thing.
All right, Dennis, you need to unmute. Dennis Goldstein, you need to unmute. Might as well stay unmuted since only a few of us tonight. Well, Darryl, you what are your thoughts?
My thoughts is that as people are wringing their hands over Nancy Pelosi going to the Republic of China, as compared to the People's Republic of China, formerly known as Taiwan, that this is really, really dangerous stuff. Just look at the optics of it. Was Mr. Zawahiri a bad guy? Yeah, I guess he was if you believe the stories. But even if you don't believe the stories, what right does one nation have to go into a third nation, execute more than likely a non-citizen, and then tell the world that, hey, that's what we did? I think that could set a really dangerous precedent. And the optics just aren't really all that good for the nations that we're supposed to be comforting while they're being asked to absorb a lot of economic strife. And I just think it's a really dangerous thing to go in assassinating people. It's one thing to extract somebody and take them to trial. It's another thing to send in a drone. And I really would like to know how it was accomplished. Not only that, I don't think most Americans care, which is even more tragic than the actual act. So we'll see.
All right. Dennis Goldstein, are you there? Dennis? All right, let me move to Michael. Michael Jankowitz, we're talking about the assassination of Ahmed al-Zawahiri today or over the weekend in Kabul. What are your impressions about that?
Well, actually, I I haven't heard that much about it. To be quite honest, it wasn't on the news earlier in the day. I just recently heard, but I'll have to, since I just came on, beg off for a second till I get more information.
All right. Yeah, Dennis, what were you going to say about the assassination of him?
A bad thing, but it's the normal, it's the usual way they operate. And it means that the United States is a reactionary government. It's run, I mean, the world, I don't know, it just the way they operate is criminal. That's what I would say. I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Well, let's turn to, and we can go back to this. Let's turn to this whole situation. I want to spend some time talking about, before we shift to the Ukraine, I want to spend some time talking about this whole situation with Pelosi going to China, because there's a lot of interesting sidebar ramifications that are interesting to explore. Now, this is CBS News today talking about this. And let's just make sure it's all copacetic, and there it is. So let's hear what
about the story we'll be bringing you this morning with our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse, that the first ship has left Odessa with grain. James, good to have you with us. So talk us through what's happened over the past couple of hours.
Nuala, this is a small but significant start. We've had days of speculation. Preparations have clearly been happening along the southern Odessa region, but finally you have it, the Grisoni, a ship. You can see it there with its blue hull and stowed cranes on top. It's carrying 26,000 tons of Ukrainian grain. It's destined for Lebanon. It will travel along this planned corridor in the Black Sea through these mine-infested waters alongside it's in range of a Russian naval blockade. It will then make its way via Istanbul, where it will be inspected like all of the vessels in this landmark deal before heading on. Now, before this war, Ukraine was known as the breadbasket of Europe. It exported 5 million tons of grain every month from its ports. That has been slashed to effectively a third because of Russia's effective closure of the Black Sea. The landmark deal last week means this ship can finally leave, but there are a lot of ifs and buts. More need to follow. There are tens of millions of people at risk of starvation unless they receive this cargo. But the hope is, from all the parties involved in this deal, is that this will form an effective routeway, a safe path out of Ukraine to allow grain to once again move across the world, Ukrainian grain, alongside what is still a very much an active war.
Yeah, it's interesting there, James, and so much attention on this one ship. But I was just seeing the Secretary General of the UN saying the hopes it'll be the first of many, as you mentioned there. But is there any idea of when the second might go, or is it really waiting for this full journey to take place before more ships launch?
Well, the giveaway is how much in the dark we are being kept. We know there's another port around 25 miles to the south called Chornomorsk. We've seen demining in that area. We've seen heavy military patrols. Soldiers are very keen to know what people are up to. We're told at some point this afternoon more vessels could follow. But look, I think we need to keep this in perspective. Yes, this is significant. But when we're looking at the scale of these things, there are reports between 1, 3, or maybe 16 ships that could leave today. That is still, and pun intended, that's still a drop in the ocean for what is required, not just for Ukraine's damaged economy, but some of the poorest countries in the world, which are some of grain's biggest grain customers. So there will be universal sighs of relief in Ukraine. We've spoken to crews here who are just desperate to get back to work. They are not scared when you speak to them of the very obvious and real risks, but the ambition is for this to last for an initial 4-month period. That can be extended, but this is still fragile, and it would just take fighting to break out once for the whole deal to be in jeopardy, affecting millions of people. We've seen it before in the case of temporary ceasefires across the country, so no one is going to be getting carried away. But this, for so many in Ukraine, is a welcome sight.
And I suppose there we know that if any fighting breaks out, as you mentioned there, James, the whole deal could come crumbling down. But the fact that this has started, or perhaps could continue, does that have any reflection on, I don't know, any potential peace in the future or any softening of relations?
The short answer is no, because you just have to look at the timeline. This deal was signed last Friday. On Saturday, Russia launched missile attacks on the port of Odessa. Its defense was that it was targeting military sites, so therefore wasn't violating the deal. But in the days since, we've had airstrikes right along this coastline. The city of Mykolaiv, further around, has seen some of its heaviest bombardments this week, as well as the fighting continuing in the eastern Donbass region. This war is continuing. I think the reason Russia has engaged is because there's something in it for Moscow as well. In a parallel deal, Russia is now able to export some of its own products like grain and fertilizer, which it's previously struggled to do so because of sanctions. So Russia is getting something out of it, and it's also allowing Vladimir Putin to say, look, I am part of this solution, because as far as he is concerned, it's not Russia's fault that there is this global food crisis. It is the West, in his words, because of how it reacted to the pandemic. So there's something in it for everyone, but everyone will nervously watch on for now.
James Waterhouse, thank you so much talking us through that news, of course, that the first ship has left.
All right, so that wasn't Nancy Pelosi, but we'll get to her in a minute. But what do you think about that? Like, what does that mean? What's the significance of these grain shipments finally getting underway? Anybody want to chime in on that?
26,000, 26,000 tons isn't much. I need to start really moving those other 16 ships pretty quick. And as others have pointed out, if there is, some kind of accidental explosion from mines or anything like that, since the insurance situation is so problematic, you don't know. You don't know whether that'll just gum up the works again. And as I said, there's a reciprocal thing going on. Russia gets to sell its fertilizer. There may be a situation where it's very slow to get the stuff out of Ukraine, but Russia gets most of their fertilizer out in time, and then suddenly, Ukraine's shipments are halted by some kind of action in the Black Sea. That's the kind of mentality we expect the Russians to play. So I think it's good for revenue for Ukraine, but it's as I understand it, they're supposed to have like 80 million tons of wheat a year. They're down to 54, and next year they'll probably be down to a lot less than that. So this is crippling, not for Ukraine, and obviously countries like Lebanon and Egypt and places too. So I think in Lebanon it's gone up 400%. So everybody's hurting out there in the countries that are dependent on their wheat, the cereal crops.
All right, anybody else want to chime in on this?
Well, actually, I have to say, it's Mike. It's also, excuse me, Russia letting the world know that they control the flow of the supply. In other words, they can turn the spigot off, they can turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. So there's a real control thing going on here. One ship getting through, if it does indeed get through, is, to be quite honest, no pun intended, again, a drop in the bucket. So we'll have to see where this goes. And again, if Russia's going to keep on shelling Odessa but letting ships go through, it's just not going to work. I don't know. This is a very tenuous situation. This string can break in various places and in various times. So I'd wait and see. Let's see what happens with this ship, and then see what happens, how many more can get through.
Yeah, we'll have to be a whole bunch of ships. Dennis Goldstein, you want to comment on this, Dennis? You want to unmute? Dennis? All right, while Dennis is doing that, Darryl, what's your thoughts about this?
The questions are, is Turkey flexing its muscle? What are the financial arrangements around the shipping process, cost, things of that nature? How are you going to conduct a war? You're getting ready to do a counteroffensive in Kherson. You're going to have a lot of fighting. How is that going to affect the movement of grain to the ports? Or are they only going to be able to get out the grain that's already at the ports? A lot of questions as to how it's even being reported. I'd like to see some independent source actually talking about some of the nuts and bolts of who's getting paid what for what. Because see, I'm still having problems with the European gas going through Ukraine, and how no one is explaining that. So we need a lot more economic information so that we can make some wiser decisions here. I think that Michael said that it shows who has control here, but I would suggest it's less the Russians and more. I'd be more worried about the mines than I would be about a Russian patrol ship taking out a boat. So I think there are a lot of questions here that need to be answered by savvy news media that we haven't had throughout this whole crisis.
All right, Dennis, do you have any comments about this? About the grain shipments finally starting? All right, well, we'll come back to you, Dennis, on this. Let me just raise the issue that was talked about yesterday when we were discussing the situation, and that was this POW camp that was either hit by bombardment or not. And here's a picture of the actual target. You know, you can see like the missile coming through the top there, the exploding inside. They had on Twitter pretty gruesome photos. I think they are still around of the actual casualties. People just disintegrated, burned up, etc. And both sides are accusing each other of attacking the camp. The Russians said the camp was hit by Ukrainian rockets. The Ukrainians said the site was targeted by Russia in an effort to destroy evidence of torture and killing. And we know that the prisoners included members of the Azov battalion that was captured at Mariupol. And then there was a tweet out of the embassy in London on Friday stating that the militants deserve execution, but death not by firing squad, but by hanging, because they're not real soldiers. They deserve a humiliating death. And here, a spokesperson for the Donetsk Republic said the strike had been a direct hit on a barracks holding prisoners. Interesting. So that contradicts the Russians. The Russians said that the strike had been carried out with HIMARS and accused Ukraine of deliberately perpetuating the attack as a provocation. Zelensky, an advisor, said that it looked like it was arson. and that a missile strike would have scattered the bodies. So obviously, the only way to determine this is to have a bunch of quote neutral end quote bodies investigated. But how do we know that's even going to happen? And here's some of the, this is one of the reportage of the actual attack. This was prison number 120, where these guys were being held. And here on the map is where it is. So it's sort of actually near the front line. Olenivka prison. It's in the southwestern suburbs of Donetsk. So I don't know what to say. It's just like, something that obviously is going to have to be investigated and proven by international sources. Now, Newsweek had an interesting article where they were just focusing in on the whole question of Russian war crimes in general. And what they did was, this is from the Newsweek today, they did a whole piece here on war crimes in general. How do you understand them? And is he targeting civilians in the Ukraine? This is a wider article. This is by William Arkin. It starts with discussing all the different organizations that are busy putting together indictments. On the surface, most of them seem open and shut, but in the bombing of Ukraine, establishing the basis for war crimes is far more difficult. And they're basically showing the kind of, nuances about, how you're going to declare what is a war crime and what isn't. And their conclusion is that none of the cases unambiguously qualifies. Now, here's a chart listing all the different airstrikes or bombing incidents with the highest casualty count. And you can see that the highest here is that theater in Mariupol that was destroyed on the 16th of March. We all remember that. And it goes further down to bombing instances as of a few days ago in Vinnytsia and all these other target areas around here. And that's a map where those bombing incidents actually occurred. Now, but the question is, were they military in nature, or are there cases where civilians were killed because weapons just failed to work?
Jim, I have a question. Have there been any reports of any other casualties other than the POWs from that supposed strike?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe somebody else does.
Well, the only reason I'm saying that is that if only POWs were killed or wounded, then it's highly suspicious that it would have been a Ukrainian strike against what it mistakenly took for a military target.
Well, I must admit, it's also a little weird to think that the Russians would have decided. I mean, the Ukrainians are arguing that the Russians deliberately destroyed that prisoner of war camp to hide evidence of torture. Okay, possibly, but on the other hand, again, it's like, I don't know. I mean, it is close to the front lines of the Ukraine, as we saw. It was close to the front lines of the fighting between the Ukrainians and the Russians. So, I don't know. I really don't know.
Well, there's another aspect of this that needs to be taken into consideration, although it may seem theoretical. As of late 1945, the first war criminal to be put on trial after World War II for the murder of POWs was Kurt Meyer for the murder of actually 18 Canadian prisoners of war at the Abbey d'Audin in France in 1944, 2 days after D-Day. The conclusion, he was charged on 5 counts, he was convicted on 3. One of the ones he was convicted of was basically had to do with the fact that the country, the military arm that has taken those prisoners, is responsible for the protection of those prisoners.
Right.
And they are responsible to make sure that they are away from the fields of fire, et cetera, et cetera. If this place where they were being held was close to the front lines, then in that respect, Russia can be held, or the Russian military figures, Russian military leaders in that area can possibly be held responsible on that count. So that's something that should be considered as well.
Right.
Anyway, as for your question about why would the Russians do it, well, you know, I mean, if, for instance, again, a lot of these guys were from the Azov battalion, and if somebody came in and just started shooting them, or basically started to shoot them, and Russia had to cover it up, well, the best way to do it in this instance, in this war, is with a faux missile strike, or a missile, you know, in other words, a missile strike that they can claim came from the Ukrainians.
Yeah, but if they wanted to kill them, they could have killed them like Stalin killed the Polish officers after the invasion of Poland in the Katyn massacres. I mean,
Right.
They didn't have to go to this elaborate. They could just simply take these guys out and shot them. And
No, what I'm
done with
saying
it.
is that they actually shot him. In other words, they killed him.
Yeah.
But you want to cover up, in other words, any evidence of them having been shot or actually executed.
Right.
So basically, you hit it with a missile, the bodies are blown to bits,
Right.
and all the forensic evidence disappears.
Right. Well, good point. Well, that's why somebody has to get on the ground. Neutral people have to get on the ground and figure it out. Now, this is interesting here. They're saying that in this Newsweek piece, even as the United States and NATO redouble their efforts to prepare for a grand war in Europe, politicians, the media, and the public ignore the destructiveness of a ground war, conflating its many unavoidable effects with war crimes. The mistaken belief that the civilian tragedy in Ukraine is solely the result of Russian design only makes our understanding of future wars more difficult. And they talk about that destruction in that shopping center on June 27th, where 21 civilians were killed and another 100 were wounded. And all these different leaders declared it an abominable act. Now, the question here is where a military target exists using disproportionate force while knowing the strike will likely cause death or injury to civilians or damage to civilian structures is a war crime. You know, the whole question of proportionality. But then the question is, what's military necessity? Now, the Russians argued, here they're using these KH-22 missiles that are obsolete, according to their, I mean, they're just bringing everything out of their inventory. So here they have an attack on this shopping center where they destroyed the shopping center. But then the prosecutors need to show that the attacks are not merely accidents or collateral damage. So the Russian discussion was that they aimed at hangars with armament and munitions delivered by the United States and European countries at Kremenchug road machinery plant. And on this point, most observers and investigators agree Russia's lying. The facility in question is about 400 meters away from the supermarket. And so here's this. But then I remember when I looked at it, I saw that there were the supermarket, while it was south of it, you know, if they fired a couple of missiles into that area to destroy the target, well, it's likely that an older missile would have not. I think there were several missiles fired that day, and some of which struck the target, some of which didn't. Again, I don't know. But, you know, here you go back and forth. The Russians assert that the civilian deaths in the town of Bucha were manufactured by Ukraine, and that Kyiv hired actors to play the civilians lying in the streets. And, you know, here so back, they're basically condemning the Russians in terms of their honesty about this. Then there's a hospital at Volkhatar that was 50 miles north of Mariupol. It was hit on the early morning of February 24th by a Tochka missile, SS-21 missile. 4 people were killed and 10 civilians. Now, is it, you know, what's the story with that? You know, and this whole article I recommend, it just gets into these questions of gray areas, what's a war crime, how is it reported, etc. But I just want to hear other people's thoughts on this issue.
Well, you're right in pointing out the KH-22. I mean, when you're firing S-300s, S-300s are a big missile as an air defense counter to whatever's coming, in terms of, it could be against strategic bombers or against any other aircraft coming out of Russia. That is a large missile. If it misses its target, it's got to fall somewhere, and it's also lethal. I mean, in a big way. So yeah, you got issues about accuracy. You've got issues about jamming and deflections of incoming cruise missiles. Whether that's a defense is another question, and this goes back to the POW situation. That was seemed to be about less than 15 kilometers from the line of contact, and as Mike's pointed out, that's a violation of convention. You're supposed to put them in beyond that. They're supposed to be safe POWs. And if you look at the actual target, what we have of the photo of it, my argument is that, if this was a HIMARS, why weren't these frames of these bedsteads completely destroyed? Well, clearly not. I mean, and the way that the ceiling seems to have fallen in rather than being punched through with a missile. A missile would blow that all out. It wouldn't be just folded down like that. I mean, this is just a simple roofing. So, even a layman can see that there's something wrong with that. So then the question is, why are the Russians doing these to civilian targets? And also, in this particular instance, why are they making themselves appear to be, after just a cursory glance, appear to be so on the wrong side of morality? And, one of the reasons, and this is a really callous reason and a cynical one, is that it's very important to make sure that those on the one side can never reconcile, can never, be one happy family again. It's like being in a mafia family. Doesn't matter which kind of mafia family, Italian, Irish, Jewish, whatever. If your family conducts business in such a way that it is violent and criminal, that's what you are. I mean, that's your family. And so, there's no crossing that divide. So you've got Russians on the one side and Ukrainians on the other. It is in the interests of Russia to make sure that that divide stays in place, such that, Russian people in Ukraine who are of Russian origin know that they're on the wrong side. If they're separatists, they're on the wrong side. And there's no way, because of what's happened, there can ever be what was done in South Africa, what's it called, the reconciliation thing. There's just no way.
Reconciliation process.
The truth and there can't be. And this is cynicism of the worst kind, but it's Russia doing it. I mean, they're obliterating towns such that you can, if you're sympathetic to the Russians and you're on that side and you said as such, there's no way you can shake hands with somebody on the other side of the line after what's been done, especially in Bucha and down in Mariupol. So there's a lot. In other words, there's a logic to it, which is very Russian, very, very Russian, absolutely very Russian, more than anybody else. There is a logic to killings.
Okay. All right. Well, here you see another case where they're talking about a situation in Odessa on June 30th. And here are the explanations. Zelensky denounces it as a consciously, deliberately targeted Russian terror, not some error or coincidental missile strike. And the Russians reply to their audience domestically that it's a sophisticated provocation to accuse the Russian armed forces of killing civilians. they argue that all participants in the staged scenes after the video filming are provided with a cash reward in the amount of $500, while $100 have already been paid to each in advance. Now, what I stress for that, we can, of course, look at it as a ridiculous comment. On the other hand, it's a comment that does indeed impact on Russian domestic opinion, because most Russians believe that kind of explanation. And again, it gets exported around the world. Now here's another attack on a ammo dump at Serhivka, and this is they're looking at who did it, etc. But there's a question here of an ammo dump that was blown up, and it might have been an errant missile rather than one legitimately taking that target out, which was a Ukrainian target. And again, they're talking about this KH-22 missile. And it will land, here's the interesting question, like a missile like this will land within 3 miles of its intended target. So its CEP is, almost 3 miles. That's quite extraordinary. That's hundreds and hundreds of yards. And so interesting. And then the KH-32 has a circular area probability 1.5 miles. So that could also aim and hit a target that would be considered a civilian target with that kind of percentages in its ability to aim and acquire. Let me bring Darryl in on this. Darryl, you have some comments on this whole issue? All right. Dennis, you have some? Yeah, go on, Darryl.
No, it's Mike. If you want to bring somebody on first, I'll come on after.
Yeah, Darryl or Dennis, do you want to comment on this? This question of war crimes. I mean, war itself is a war crime to start with. So, I mean, let's be clear about that. But they're just going and listing all these different incidents in this long piece in Newsweek, and talking about who did what, when, and who. And now here's an ambiguity here. They're talking about a series of strikes against Zhytomyr, which has all sorts of military bases there. So, are the intended, because the military bases there, that might be their main targets, but, is that a legitimate target? And then, of course, you have these issues of collateral damage with innocent civilians. Anyway, I'm just curious what you guys think.
All right, well, while we're waiting for everybody else, it's Mike again. Excuse me. I should say, first of all, even 1.5 miles of the intended target. I mean, the Norden bomb site was far more, which was used during World War II, was far, far more accurate than that. These are not smart weapons by any stretch of the imagination. The fact is that the choice of using those weapons could be held accountable for that, if they purposely use those weapons, knowing full well that the accuracy was less than that of any World War II weapon. Also, the fact that if you look at away from the U.S. precision bombing, if you look at during the Second World War, if you look at Bomber Harris's carpet bombing campaign, even he was forced to justify this mass carpet bombing by saying it was not specifically or primarily aimed to kill civilians, but rather to destroy infrastructure, the infrastructure of the city that was supporting the factories, the industry that was going on, that was considered the military target, and that was prior to the post-war rules and regulations about what constitutes war crime and what is allowed as far as bombing, which by considering the advancements made in quote unquote smart weapons would be a logical thing to do, a logical step to take. So again, Russia is trying to justify by saying they were military targets nearby, but they seem to be justifying it using a World War II scenario. Taking, in other words, not even considering the weapons that are available, especially in their arsenal, the weapons that are available today, and the new rules and regulations that were brought into effect accordingly, international rules of bombing. So yeah, they could say that there was a military target nearby. The idea is, did they do everything they could to avoid civilian casualties? And if they say, well, these are mistakes, these are pretty bad mistakes. I mean, it does say something then. I mean, it's a lose-lose situation for the Russians in that sense, because it says something about their competence, as far as their missile strikes, as far as their bombing record during this war. So one way or the other, they either did commit a war crime, or they're just simply not competent enough by the standards of at least a major power. Also, this idea, again, they shoot themselves in the foot by saying, oh, it was all staged, which is a really that's something that, is far-fetched even in Donald Trump's mentality. And that's saying a lot. And then they turn around, at the same time, they're saying, well, there was a military target nearby. So they're shooting themselves in the foot as far as propaganda goes on this. And I don't know, again, there would have to be a international investigation, and it would have to be done according to the rules, the specific rules of what constitutes a war crime and what is allowable under international law as during wartime, as far as bombing or missile strikes.
All right. Any other comments? Go on, Frank.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, there seems to be an argument within Russian circles that sort of justifies what they're doing. I mean, it has been stated that, Ukraine, this war can stop if Ukraine puts its weapons down and concedes. That seems to be the objective of Russia and Putin. So in order to induce people to put their weapons down, you have to do what exactly? Well, you have to show them that if they persist in standing up to the Russian juggernaut, everything around them will be pulverized, which is what's happening. All these major towns are, in fact, being flattened. And, Mariupol being the prime example, and many other smaller, we've seen plenty of pictures of smaller townships absolutely flattened. So, the message is that if you continue to stand up against, this imperial power, you will suffer accordingly. And that mentality seems to be pervasive at the top in Russia. And, it's beyond morality. It's not a morality play from their point of view. It's might is right because it's, they're fighting over Russian territory as far as they're concerned. So they're just persisting in this thing. And, they're entitled to use whatever weapon system they can. And are, but what needs to happen, obviously, is they need to be stopped and they need to lose, but that's not happening. And that's another argument we can have as we go on. That's my opinion anyway.
Well, there's another question that I think needs to be raised, which I got to say before, which is that if these are indeed war crimes, and if these are indeed, egregious breaches of the rules of war, does Russia care? I mean, does Putin care? In other words, if he's already a pariah on a moral sense internationally, does he care? I mean, not to compare, I'm not going to try to compare him to Nazi Germany, okay? But I mean, in a more egregious sense, did Germany really, did Hitler really care whether or not the world thought he was committing war crimes? Not really. I mean, he put up a bit of a front towards it, or the German High Command did at least, maybe to protect their own troops, but morally, they just didn't care. And again, I'm sorry, I don't think Putin is on the same level as Hitler. I mean, he hasn't, had that we know of. He doesn't have any death camps that we know of. But the fact is that, and he's not, trying to, or if he's not trying to commit genocide, or if he is, he's not doing a very good job of it. But the fact is that if he's already held as a pariah, what difference does it make? I mean, who's going to prosecute? Even if Russia loses the war, Russia's not going to be overrun. They're not going to, the Putin regime isn't going to surrender and say, okay, we accept your, we unconditionally surrender and we accept your judgment. So the fact of the matter is, they may just not care.
All right, what do you think? Dennis or Darryl, what do you think about this before we move on? Go on, Darryl.
Well, I think the whole thing is pretty much immoral. I think that we need to be very careful what we're calling war crimes and what we're not, because the United States, well, I'm just troubled by how the war is being conducted to the death of the last Ukrainian, no matter which side you look at. So if the West wanted to stop the war would be stopped. So I'm very puzzled about how this information is being shared with the public, more to make points with the public that doesn't particularly care one way or the other. Because once again, if the West wanted to stop this, it's pretty clear. I would suggest that it's pretty clear that Russia isn't the power that it went into this situation portraying itself as, or else we wouldn't be having war right now. So I think that it is a Ukrainian call. If they can still get the weapons, then that government has the right to continue fighting the way it's fighting. But the people who are providing the weapons could end the situation simply by providing better protection for the Ukraine, under going to the international community, saying that this is an invasion of a country, and we need to uphold the international law that's unacceptable, and we need to end it. So more United Nations work, and if necessary, then let NATO do its thing, and it stops.
Yeah, I agree with Darryl that NATO could intervene. There's a couple of admirals, Mullins, I think, Stavridis, whatever his name is, both agree that we could secure the Black Sea in such a way that we didn't violate Russian Black Sea borders, but nevertheless secure Odessa, and that would be doable. And yes, we do have an air force that clearly is far superior than what the Russians have. But then again, they are holding back some of their better aircraft. I'm not quite sure whether it's because they're so expensive and they can't afford to lose them, as they are losing them in drips and drabs. And it is immoral from our point of view in certain respects, because here we are, we talk a good line about Western democracy, but I can't help but thinking of the Uvalde situation. It's like, I'm sure those cops were talking a good line before they went in, but they failed at the crux of it, and at the crisis moment. And we're doing the same thing. There's a lot on the line. Putin can rattle some serious sabers with these nukes, but we're letting something fester that may not, as I see it, if we continue to manage this thing at a slow, drip in terms of reinforcing Ukraine, this could fester into a really bad cancer. Unless something happens soon, as I keep saying, it's going to get very bad. And I think we need to cross the Rubicon and make a decision. And I'm afraid that these midterms are more important here than anything else. It overrides everything else. And each country, each democracy has got its own version of that. As we know in Italy, and Macron's got issues too, and Olaf Scholz is a joke. And of course, we don't know what's going on in Britain. So, what happens next? I think within the next 2 to 3 weeks. I've always said it's August. If it doesn't happen in August, the West has a problem.
All right. Let me shift to Asia for a few minutes here. No, hold on. I want to go into Asia before we. I don't want to.
I know. I don't want to lose the subject. It's just to add to what Darryl was saying, because we do have to be very clear as to what is a war crime. If a country is, by either choice or even by necessity, has military troops or military forces or some sort of military installation among civilians, then you can't say it's a war crime, because they were hitting a military target. I mean, that's happened in the Middle East. It's happened in several other places as well. So we do have to be careful about that. So I just wanted to, before we start making generalizations, just wanted to get that point in.
All right. I think this is it. Wait a minute. Okay. So here is the daily news in Ukraine from The Guardian. Now, the British are requiring foreign companies holding UK property to identify their true owners. I should say there's an estimate out of Yale that there are about 1,000 companies trading with Russia right now that the sanctions regimes have not affected. Sort of interesting. 1,000 American-owned companies. This is the grain exporting ship we just saw. The harvest this year could be half its usual amount because of the invasion, Zelensky says. This is that story we talked about yesterday about this group of Marines in a naval infantry brigade that refused to fight. The International Red Cross has not yet received permission to visit the building where the prisoners were killed. There was a shelling in Mykolaiv that killed one of the Ukraine's wealthiest men, Alexei Vodorsky, and his wife, Raisa. And this guy's an individual who has, I guess, a vertically integrated company exporting grain. And the Ukrainians are claiming it was specifically targeted, premeditated murder. Again, who knows? Mykolaiv was hit on Sunday. This is, again, the latest news. And here is, again, this report we were talking about yesterday about troops being moved south by the Russians to prepare for the Ukrainian counterattack that's underway. Now, here's interesting. The fights in these very thick forests. And they're talking about, this guy's comparing it to the Vietnamese jungle. I don't know. Anyway, and here's this again, this story. They're bolstering their troops south. This is this question of foreign entities being cracked down on in England. They're trying to identify oligarchs. The first grain ship left today. And then this Mykolaiv attack. And here's the British intelligence estimate for today. That over the last 4 days, Russia has continued to attempt tactical assaults on the Bakhmut axis, northeast of Donetsk, only managing to make slow progress. Russia is likely to reallocate a number of its forces from the northern Donbass to southern Ukraine. They're adjusting the design of the Donbass offensive after failing to make a decisive breakthrough under the plan it had been following since April. It is likely identified its Zaporizhzhia front as vulnerable area in need of reinforcement. We've seen that again and again. Little limited attacks and not much force down there. So they're shifting troops into the southern Ukraine. Zelensky again urges people to flee the whole Donbass area. And the Kyiv area, they've discovered that 300 people are still considered missing. Probably, unfortunately, casualties of the bombings and the fighting around there. Now here is video and information going closer to the time we're talking about now. So here's more detail on the ships. We saw this. It was listed that there were 16 grain vessels there that are docked, and they have about almost 600,000 tons of grain on them. It's 580,000 tons. So here the Razoni, we just saw the picture of that earlier. It leaves the port of Odessa. Here it is loaded up, ready to go, the Razoni. And that's the route it's going to take down to the Bosphorus over here. Basically, Turkish, Ukrainian, and UN staff are monitoring loading the grain onto ships, providing and making sure there's no military. The Ukrainian vessels will guide commercial vessels through these paths down here to get through the minefields. And then they'll be monitored as they cross the Black Sea towards the Bosphorus Strait. So in other words, they're trying to maintain the integrity of what's going on here. The DPR announced it had liberated 263 settlements. And here are pictures of life returning to normal. People swimming in the Dnieper River at Kiev in a Sunday afternoon. Various grave sites. Kharkiv, or damaged building. A big picture of a worker in a farmer warehouse in Odessa with grain. And here's the Razoni being loaded up right there, ready to go. And here it is. We just saw it. It's underway. The Razoni itself earlier. And finally, let's get to the latest clip here, the newest clip. Again, this summary of the news here going on there in the Ukraine. I guess they repeat the story here. Like there's, okay, so we're talking about this attack on a city in, let me just get to the bottom here so we go up. That's the last page to review. All right, so again, the repetition of the stories we heard earlier. People killed. There's a Ukrainian drone strike in Sevastopol. And the urging of evacuation from the eastern Donetsk region, the movement of troops. The Russians agreed to allow grain ships to leave Ukraine and not to attack them. Sierra Leone flagship Razzoni. And here is questions of QAnon and anti-vaccine theories are switching focus and spreading. Interesting. So this is something where people are pushing ideas that Western countries are responsible for the interruption of wheat, barley, and maize exports from the Ukraine. And the Russians have made the same claims. And so this is being regarded as a manipulation. QAnon's actually arguing this. Interesting, good old QAnon. Here's interesting. The interesting argument is the relationship between QAnon and other anti-vax and online conspiracy communities are arguing this issue about deliberate manipulation of food supply by the West. Again, lots to talk about when we come out of this. And here's the Razzoni leaving. Now here you have this interesting article that was published in The Guardian about Dmitry Medvedev, and he had been somebody who had been more or less open to discussions with the West. He'd visited Silicon Valley and got an iPhone 4 from Steve Jobs, and now he is very much involved in the macho posturing of the wartime Moscow. And here they're saying the reason he's doing this is he's trying to save himself from political oblivion. And Alexei Navalny basically says that he's a pathetic and pointless person. He could have shaved his head or gone to the gym, but instead he decided to reinvent himself as a hawk. Okay, that's interesting. Now here's the HIMARS in action, and they're receiving 4 more. 4 more are going to be coming in to the inventory of the Ukrainian army in the next few days. And actually, they've arrived. And here the Ukrainians are saying they've recaptured 40 settlements. The crewmen, that's interesting, Syrian crewmen, how happy they are to get underway. They've been stuck in Ukraine, in Odessa for quite a time, and now they're able to get underway with their ship. And this was an attack on a hospital. Now, again, I don't know what the target, there might have been a military target near there. Could be along the lines of what we've been talking about with these these old clunky Russian missiles not hitting the target they are after. But nevertheless, civilian collateral damage has to be considered in planning. And now 39 more Britons are banned, including Labour leader Keir Starmer. I wonder what he did to piss them off. And finally, a bill that would ban the adoption of Russian children by citizens of unfriendly countries. So this is something, you people may know that Russian orphans have been adopted by U.S. children and other Western countries for years. And so now this bill is moving through the chambers of the Russian parliament to be signed into law. And now Vladimir Putin made a comment today about nuclear war. We proceed from the fact that there can be no winners in a nuclear war, and it should never be unleashed, and we stand for equal indivisible security for all members of the world community. This was at a nuclear non-proliferation treaty forum in Moscow, where he said this. That's a repeat of that. Now here's the Gazprom stuff. Politics of gas. The daily gas production of Russia's Gazprom dropped in July to its lowest since 2008. It's 14% less than in June. It found this is a Bloomberg study, it found that the Russian gas exports monopoly overall total output for the year was 12% less than last year at this time period. So, interesting. They're sort of cutting back gas for political purposes. And that looks like the news up to now that's current from the Ukraine. Any comments on that news?
Well, you mentioned the study by Yale, which I've been looking at, and essentially it's saying that the the misconception is that the Russian economy is not weathering these sanctions, even though the ruble seems to be stabilized. That in fact its imports are practically zero. And you mentioned that there are companies, but the Yale study has done a much more extensive look at from the West's data point of view, rather than rely on Russia's data, which has been cherry picked and is giving an illusion as to how well they're doing. And essentially, the Yale study is saying that they're in dire straits.
Right.
And it's getting worse. And that I think we should talk about a lot more next time we do this. But yeah, and as far as the actions of the Russians in reinforcing the Kherson Oblast, I think that's a symptom of some desperation going on. But it's a bold front you put up. You put up a bold front, and the other side is fooled. I mean, that's classic military posturing that you do in order to prevent the enemy from doing anything that you don't want them to do, because it's like a Beau Geste situation. You got all these dead bodies up there. I don't know that they're dead, so I'm not going to attack that front, right? But I think Russia is hurting right now, and I think we should do something about it right now. At least, yes, that's what I've been looking at.
This is a study. This is a very extensive study, about 120 pages.
Right.
It was done in July, and it looks like it's out of a whole bunch of business schools participated, including Yale School of Management. And it's pretty comprehensive in terms of its look of the issues that Frank is talking about. Worth looking at. And I will indeed read it myself. Now, one of the issues we brought up yesterday was the question of the effects of artillery barrages on people. And I was looking at that today. I was looking at, okay, what's been written about that? Well, it turns out that one of the most influential studies, and I was looking through all the stuff I have here. I found this, what I consider one of the best books written in the past 30 years on field artillery. But this is an article that was done in this think tank, the Wavell Room, Contemporary British Military Thought. Now, General Wavell, of course, is I always admire him, one of my favorite British commanders of World War II. And what they're talking about is that, what's the effect of artillery on the psychology of the defender? What will happen in terms of it eroding will? And this has been debated ever since 1914, 1915. I mean, we can go back to the offensives of the British on the Western Front, which failed because they did not have sufficient artillery to overcome the German defenses. The Battle of Loos, all those operations done in 1915 by the British, and then the French were learning the hard way too through the terrible loss of human lives, which got them to the point where they felt that they'd solved the problem in 1916 with the Somme offensive, and they didn't, and then again and again repeated throughout the war. Now, what this is based on is there was a study at the end of the Second World War by a Lieutenant Colonel Michael Swan, who later became the chairman of the BBC. He was a zoologist who had turned into a soldier. In the last months of the Second World War, he did the most comprehensive. Now, again, I don't agree with this, because this is a Brit who's writing about artillery effectiveness, and I would argue that the Russian studies of their offensives in World War II were really quite detailed. And I'm talking now about the General Staff studies written about all Stalingrad, Moscow, Kherson. We're talking about Kherson these days, the General Staff study on the Kherson campaign in 1944. They all included looks at artillery in terms of its impact on the Germans. But he's asserting that this study had a great impact on Western military thinking. So what did he do? He looked at 4 battalion attacks in November of 1944, part of Operation Clipper, and 12 battalion attacks from the first day of Operation Veritable, February 8, 1945. Now, Operation Veritable was the crossing of the Rhine by the British Army. Clipper, I forget. Maybe Michael would remember Clipper. Others might. I don't remember that operation. And he was talking about the actual number of rounds fired. Now, the reason they go to Veritable is it was a fire plan that was, and this is, one of Montgomery's great specialties. It was a barrage of 1,800 guns on a 10-kilometer front, and in the first 14 hours, 700,000 shells were fired. Now, keep in mind the kind of things we're seeing about the expenditure of fire by the Russians on a daily basis over a 1,300-kilometer front. 50 to 60,000 shells versus 5 to 6,000 shells. 14 hours, 700,000 shells. And they're comparing it to El Alamein, where 1,000 guns fire 1 million shells, but take more than a week to do it on a 32-kilometer front. Now, so here's this wall of fire. 6,500 shells fell in every grid square every hour. Every grid square, which is... and this fire was 4,500 meters wide, 450 meters deep. And they followed it with assault of 12 British infantry battalions with 400 tanks and all sorts of funnies, as they used to call them, all those specialized tanks. And they fought through 7 kilometers of German defense line and collapsed a infantry division. German infantry, 84th Infantry Division. So this is the study that what I found interesting. I never even heard this study that influences Western thinking about massive artillery use for the rest of the 20th century. All right. So, and you're seeing here a chart that comes out of this study. And Clipper, unfortunately, Alex isn't here. I'd asked him to check out what Operation Clipper is. I assume November 1944. I assume it's a action around the fighting around Walcheren, up there in the islands around Antwerp. I would sound.
No, actually, Jim.
Where is it?
Operation Clipper was an attempt to reduce the area around what is the name of that? Basically to gain control of the Roer Valley. That's ROER.
Okay. So it's
in 84.
All right. So it's that period of time when the Anglo Allies were locked in that those bitter fights with the Germans before the Battle of the Bulge,
it was successful, and primarily due, if I may be so biased, to some very clever maneuvering by Brian Horrocks, Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, 30 Corps.
Right. Okay.
And artillery was instrumental in that.
All right. So and that of course is the British Army operating pretty effectively in the Normandy and the Northwest European campaign, along with the Canadians. Anyway, so here they're talking about the relationship of shells per attacking or casualties per defending company. So they're talking about the reduction of the resistance. And here again is a chart about showing the it's a huge 700,000 shells in 14 hours. What an amazing barrage to come under for the German infantry. So their conclusions of these attacks was, okay, so what happened to the guys who were on the ground getting clobbered like that? And how did this impact on how they developed their assessments of using artillery? And according to this little piece here, this was very influential in deciding how armies reacted to that kind of stress. And again, the Ukrainians, any kind of artillery bombardment, no matter how intense it is, it doesn't matter. It's artillery bombardment. And obviously they're not getting pounded the way the Germans were, but nevertheless, it'll take its toll after a while. So I wanted to throw that in because yesterday we had talked about that. And I sort of said, let me go look and see what was done after the war. Now, I'm pretty sure there's other studies. I'm going to keep looking at that because I'm sort of curious about it myself. But nevertheless, the military situation, because I just want to deal with that before we move to China, let me, hold on, I don't want to get distracted right now. Okay, so here you have these, this is sort of interesting. Let me just deploy this. This is a picture of one of the HIMARS strikes that hits an ammo dump in the Kherson area, and here is the ammo dump. These are, I'll just deploy these off to here. Here's the ammo dump that was struck on the night of the 31st, blowing up, and here's the pictures of it detonating that night. So these are shots of the actual ammo dump exploding, and again, there is its relationship to Kherson. It's in the rear of Kherson. It's about 49 miles in the rear. So this is being hit by HIMARS on the night of last night when we were doing our discussion. And here is a map of yesterday's bombardment in the 42nd Army area. And these are the different, the forward edge of battle. They're firing back and forth between, and here's interesting, the Russians attacked with an artillery barrage of the outskirts of Mykolaiv yesterday in retaliation to these operations coming at them. And here is the only logistical link functioning across the Dnieper. This is this pontoon bridge, which is at this bridge, the Antonovsky Bridge, which was
actually that's not quite right. There is a dam. There is a dam further up. That's the main route they're using. The Russians are using to get, and that apparently cannot be touched because everybody's a signature to a convention that you can't touch dams. So.
Oh, really? So they're going across a dam. All right.
Yeah, it's a dam. You're looking at it there. What is it called?
What, this Nova Kakova?
Yeah, right there. That's the most important, probably, for tanks and armor to move from the Russian point of view. So.
All right, but the point is that along this area here, that river we were looking at earlier, I think there's only one or two points where they have actually pontoon bridges across that river. The Antonovsky Bridge is over in this area as opposed to up here. But in any event, so that area is.
Yeah, in other words, they've isolated that southern portion. Yeah.
Now here are pictures of this naval HQ in Sevastopol that was supposedly bombed, and the Russians are denying it. And then I just want to point out, someone put out a book, or actually suggested a book on this issue, which takes us back to the 30s, the starvation of Ukrainians. And here's this, supposedly it was a drone that hit the headquarters of the Russian Black Fleet in Sevastopol.
It was also an excuse for them not to do the celebration maneuvers of the Black Sea Fleet. They cancelled it. So, it was just a ruse, in my opinion, a Russian ruse.
All right, the fair point. Now, on the first, what's interesting also on the first, where the hell is this? This is one of the, this is the most recent Yeomany of the West map, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit. Let's see. Okay, let's play around with this map. And what is this? Now, this is estimates of, interesting, unit strength assessment. But what's interesting about this is he's also talking about the strikes. This is sort of interesting. Talking about the missile defenses in depth of the Ukraine. Now here is as far west as Lviv, and here's Lutsk, and here's a regiment of anti-aircraft mobile rockets. Another one here. And then we move towards Kyiv. These are again anti-aircraft ballistic missiles defending against Kyiv. And it's 26 June. Kyiv is hit by 10 Tu-22s and 2 Su-34s. Launch a missile strike. So that's a missile strike launched from Belarus. Here is on the 6th Chernihiv being hit. And this symbol, of course, is an airfield. Then you have Vinnytsia being hit on the 13th of July with various missiles, and all this back and forth along here around Mykolaiv, in Ukraine. That is up to about the 21st of July. But what I'm showing here is all these different strikes, and this is a more organized look at it on both sides. VKS missiles striking Mykolaiv, another 2 Kh-22s launched from a Tu-22. This is the hit on Kremenchuk. So two Kh-22 missiles were launched that hit that shopping mall, along with others. And then another strike over here against Dnipro, and then all these different strikes along. Down here, strikes launched by HIMARS. They hit Belgorod and Kursk in June. Then missile strikes against the headquarters in Izium. And then various HIMARS strikes in the rear in Luhansk throughout July. And again, over here. The operations launched today inside Ukraine, where again, this is that map we showed yesterday of this front down in the Kherson area. But here are operations that are launched around Bakhmut. There were further advances. Solidar, you guys will remember, here's Siversk, Bakhmut is somewhere over to here, and Solidar is over there. So the Russians are slowly grinding their way towards Bakhmut. And here is attacks towards Solidar. Again, repetition of those attacks. In terms of, Alex isn't here to give us the Russian perspective. And here's a picture of that ship being escorted out of Odessa to take the grain today. And what's this? Oh yeah, now here is a guy who was a former police officer who's been collaborating with the Russians, and he was killed today. His car was blown up near Kherson. And here's the front today. Not much change. And here is various shelling done. And the highest concentration of shelling, as you can see, is, a lot of it is over here in the here's the south of Kharkiv down to Izium, and here's where all that bulk of the fighting is going on around Bakhmut, all those Slavyansk, all these places, and then less firing and less use of artillery going further south. That's changing, as we saw. They're shifting troops down there. And this again, Bakhmut. And here is the fighting. Now here's Zaporizhzhia. There is some preparation of missile fire into the rear of the Russian forces over here. Here's Zaporizhzhia. Remember, Kherson's off the map here. Let's see. I think that's about it for August 1st. There were some other things I noticed to bring to your attention that we hadn't really been paying much concentration to, but I think we've done.
There's a couple of international things that. Or
Yeah, now we're going to get to the international things. All right.
Well, actually, Jim, did you want to discuss artillery? I mean, as far as artillery goes, there are some aspects of artillery that most people aren't aware of, which is that the effects of, in other words, people who aren't just hit by the shells or the shrapnel. I can think of two examples, which is one was a naval gunfire bombardment on an area on the Canadian forward defense line 2 days after Normandy, in which they hit a village in which there were two companies of Panzer one of the headquarters companies and one other company. After a few minutes of that, several minutes of that, of naval gunfire, the companies, even the ones that weren't killed, were useless. It has to do with really not just intensity, but the density of the fire in a particular area and the time lapse that it has to do with. And the effect, the other example is what happened to Panzer during the American breakout in Normandy, when some American troops were coming in and they said they were Panzer troops that were walking around like, insane asylum, like it was an insane asylum, because there were differences in the air pressure that wreaked havoc with, there was blood coming out of their ears because of the the effect on the air pressure, and obviously the noise, etc. The density, as well as the intensity and the amount of time. If it's one hit, it's not, or even one salvo, it's not going to have that effect. But over a certain amount of time, and with a certain amount of density of shells, it can have an effect that goes far beyond the actual guys who were hit or blown up or hit by shrapnel from the actual shells.
Right. Well, I didn't want to bring up Operation Cobra and the breakout, but since you decided to introduce that,
Jim, all this.
Let me. Well, again, the issue. There's no doubt, that the artillery, particularly the territorial troops, and the other, and it doesn't matter if it's territorial or not. It has had a tough effect on those guys. And what Michael is referring to is this was where the Panzer Lehr elements were, right here. And this is the dispositions before they were hit by this large concentration of heavy bombers. That also, I believe this is where General Leslie McNair was killed too. He was, I think, observed in the 30th Infantry Division. He was killed by the bombing. But this, of course, is particularly, I guess, it's not as it's an extreme example, of course, of what happens because the division was basically destroyed right here. This was the point.
But you're right. This is an extreme example. Same with Goodwood and Totalize.
Correct.
You've got bombers adding to it as well. You're getting tanks literally blown in the air.
Right.
So
we don't have that in Ukraine, going on in Ukraine.
No,
right
nothing like it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. The Ukraine situation is very different than this. But let me shift abruptly to Asia, because this is now happening simultaneously with this, and there's a number of interesting pieces that came out that further developed the question of what's going on with Nancy, because now I believe Pelosi has now landed in Taiwan. I was positive the United States was not going to back down to the Chinese, because remember, the whole question that at least a national security policy experiences that, well, remember when Atchison excluded Korea from the defense perimeter, before the Korean War broke out, the communists saw that and saw that we were excluding Korea from our defense perimeter. Hence, that made it more a luscious target for them. Well, now, of course, we know from the declassified documents from Russia and China that the decision-making to attack Korea was already well underway. Kim Il-sung and Mao and Stalin, it was Stalin's last hurrah as a military commander. He took a personal interest in making sure the Korean People's Army was well equipped. So that becomes another question about the level of coordination between leaders like Xi Jinping and Putin, which we don't really know, at least not in the public discourse. So let's just look at what they're talking about.
Over House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's expected visit to Taiwan. Beijing is now flexing its military muscle ahead of the anticipated trip. Adam Yamaguchi reports from Taiwan.
Across the narrow Taiwan Strait, it's a battle of drills. Taiwan just wrapped up a week of annual live fire exercises. And China has responded in kind, increasing naval patrols, conducting live fire drills, and releasing a highly produced propaganda video. China claims Taiwan, a self-governing island of 23 million people, as its own. And the anticipated visit of Speaker Pelosi is generating accusations that the U.S. supports Taiwanese sovereignty. If Speaker Pelosi visits Taiwan, said the Chinese Foreign Affairs spokesman, it would grossly interfere in China's internal affairs. He warned the Chinese military would never sit idly by. Pelosi is leading a congressional delegation to Asia, including a stop in Singapore today. Taiwan has never been on her official schedule, but Taiwanese news media are reporting she will arrive Tuesday evening. Against this political backdrop, Taiwan is getting prepared. The military exercises here included a mock amphibious invasion, insight into Taiwan's assessment of what a war with China might look like.
The fact that we're seeing an amphibious assault suggests that the Taiwanese believe that the Chinese are going to try and take some of the outlying islands in the South China Sea and in Taiwan Strait, and this is Taiwan's effort to take them back.
Civilians are taking precautions too, learning life-saving skills as part of a volunteer emergency response team.
The U.S. is bound by law to help Taiwan get the weapons it needs to defend itself. And the American military is now moving assets, including an aircraft carrier, in closer proximity to the island. Lana?
Adam, thank you. For more on this, I am joined by Robert Ross. He is a professor at Boston College and a non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, which advocates for military restraint and diplomatic engagement. Robert, thank you for being here. Tell us, President Biden and President Xi had a very tense phone call last week, clouded by disagreements over Taiwan. National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby was asked about that phone call in regards to Nancy Pelosi's potential visit. I want to play that first for all of us.
The President, in his conversation with President Xi, made clear that Congress is an independent branch of government and that Speaker Pelosi makes her own decisions, as other members of Congress do, about their overseas travel. That was made clear.
What do you make of that response coming from the White House podium? And how much does the Communist Party in China understand that Congress is an independent branch of government?
Well, preliminarily, the White House was quite clear to somewhat disassociate itself from Nancy Pelosi's plans to visit Taiwan. They didn't offer support. They simply said it was up to her to make her own decisions. And in that way, they said one of two things. Either Senator Pelosi didn't consult with the White House, or if she did, she chose to ignore their advice. And so they were quick to disassociate and leave her out there on her own. Now, does China understand this? Yes, China understands well the independence of our congressional branch of government, but they don't really care. Nancy Pelosi is simply not a member of Congress. She's the leadership of the House of Representatives. She's the most important Democrat in the U.S. Congress, and it would set a precedent, in their view, that the United States could send just about anyone they wanted in the American political system to Taiwan, implicitly encouraging support for Taiwan, without ramifications, with Chinese acquiescence. And that's something the Chinese are not prepared to signal.
Well, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi isn't the first House Speaker to have traveled to Taiwan, but this comes in the context of international disarray given Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So how concerned is the White House about the timing of this trip?
Well, there are a number of aspects from this. China's made clear from the beginning, going back to April this year when Representative Pelosi thought about going to Taiwan, of its great opposition. So should the United States, should she go ahead with this, one would respect Chinese retaliation, and that can come in many forms. It would be difficult to accept ongoing Chinese restraint in cooperation with Russia if the United States doesn't show restraint in cooperation with Taiwan. Also, the mainland has flexed its military signaling, as you suggested, and so it might be expected that it would carry out military exercises at a higher level and perhaps carry out exercises that could create something of a confrontation. This is something the United States is clearly prepared for, but something it doesn't want to happen. How it avoids this while simultaneously acquiescing and agreeing to Representative Pelosi's visit to Taiwan is difficult to see, but it's made its preparations.
So that's how the White House is viewing this. That's how China's viewing this. But what could a visit like this mean for Taiwan and its people?
Well, we often say about Taiwan, be careful what you ask for. The closer you get to the United States, the more concern that the mainland has that you might actually believe the United States has written you a blank check and that the mainland has to begin to restrain your behavior. Well, how does the mainland do this? Perhaps by punishing Taiwan. And so when there is U.S.-China conflict over Taiwan, Taiwan frequently pays the price. So as we say, when the elephants fight, the grasshoppers pay the price, and this could well be the case for Taiwan. And you showed that clip of Taiwan preparing for a amphibious landing on a remote island in the Taiwan Strait. However much it wants to prepare, it's now sufficiently capable of resisting or counteracting such an occupation, and so the price would be significant.
All right, Robert Ross, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So what do you think of that? What do you think about what he said?
Well, it wasn't that informative. I mean, we kind of guessed that Pelosi was going out on her own whim, it seems. But then others have said that doesn't make any sense. That clearly the State Department was involved and Biden was involved in the decision making, and you know, we really don't have a firm understanding of how this decision was arrived at. That's all I'm saying. But I think it's a good thing for Taiwan. It does show a commitment on our part without actually putting Biden on the ground. Newt Gingrich apparently was the first House Speaker to go. And that was a while back when China wasn't a peer-to-peer adversary, so it was pretty safe back then. But you know, at least we're being somewhat consistent. So I think it's the right thing to do at this moment, because I genuinely don't believe that Xi Jinping will do anything, because Putin's in such a situation that it's almost irrecoverable for Russia. In 5 or 6 years, a decision like this, that's going to be different, especially 2027, as they say. 2027 could be bad. And that is, that's when Taiwan and our relationship with Taiwan, I mean, people need to understand that if we do back it, there's consequences.
All right. It's interesting. I know Bob. I haven't seen him in many years. I knew him when he was at graduate school. And I guess he's moderated his opinions over the years. He actually could be looked at as one of the people who was in the beginning inceptions of NIMAS. But because NIMAS actually stemmed from a study group in the political science department of people who wanted to read revisionist history of foreign policy which meant William Appleman Williams, Lloyd Gardner, all those guys. And then Rob wanted to do that. Then he sort of backed off because I guess he saw it as not the right thing to do career-wise. But now he's back many years later, I guess on the verge of retirement, as a member of the Quincy Institute, which is sort of headed by someone who was very much a hawk in his youth. So that's Mr. Basevich, and now later in his life has turned back, was actually part of a whole conference on William Appleman Williams a couple of years ago. So it's interesting to see Bob act like this nowadays. Interesting. Now here we have, I'm going to play a few things here, show a few things. It's from the Washington Post today. So Pelosi is going to arrive as soon as Tuesday evening into Taiwan. And, we see that the statement of the Chinese minister was a lot less volatile than actually saying we're going to shoot her out of the sky, which a few days ago, somebody said, I wonder who the hell said that. And here's this question of official policy of strategic ambiguity, which is, let me just go into the link of that. What is America's policy of strategic ambiguity? And this is what they would do if Taiwan was attacked. Now, essentially, Biden in May basically said that, yes, if China attacked Taiwan, we would defend them. And then, of course, the U.S. officials jumped in there and said, no. We want them to understand our concepts of strategic ambiguity, which is, we might do that, we might do something else. And the PLA said, we will sternly stand at ready, and when the Chinese, the People's Liberation Army will never sit idly by. And then you have, as they were mentioning, all these different exercises going down. Now, Taylor Fravel is a guy who just did a very important book on the Chinese security policy since the inception of the People's Republic. Very good, highly recommend looking at it. And now they're going on down. I don't think there's going to be any signs that the Chinese will launch major military operations. And again, we talked about this yesterday. There's little reason that China will want to shoot itself in the foot by initiating major military confrontation and undermine the very stability it craves. Because remember, they're suffering from the coronavirus lockdowns, their economy slowing. There's a major Communist Party Congress this year where Xi Jinping is probably going to get anointed until the time he dies. I think they're talking about making him party chief until 2032. And then why would she do this? Why would she go and visit Taiwan? Now, symbolic show of support by the head of U.S. legislative branch could give reassurance. That's what I think was probably where it intersected with U.S. policy. But then, of course, you had this back and forth argument between Xi Jinping and Biden this week. And here's Peter Beinart. Had Pelosi not said she was going to Taiwan in the first place, no one would be suggesting she needed to go in order to bolster American credibility in Asia. The argument that she can't back down now resembles the argument that the United States could not leave Vietnam because the war had become a test of U.S. resolve. And there is no reason for Beijing to turn a potential visit consistent with longstanding U.S. policy into some sort of crisis. And again, and this is, I think, the state-run Institute of International Studies in China. I've seen these guys come. They're always really smart. The Biden administration has continued the Trump administration's strategy of using Taiwan to contain China. The chances of a clash between China and the U.S. in the Taiwan Straits are growing. So that's one opinion. Let me share a couple of others. This is a piece in the Washington Post, another piece in the Washington Post. If she goes to China, high-ranking of U.S. officials don't usually go to Taiwan. Here's why. And they were referring to the last time that a high-ranking political figure went to Taiwan is when Newt Gingrich went there back in 1997 when he was Speaker of the House. And this gets into the whole issue of how we negotiated with China during the whole Richard Nixon Kissinger period. And the only president to visit ever Taiwan was Dwight D. Eisenhower, who met with Chiang Kai-shek in 1960. And again, remember, we had pretty close military relations with them at the time. We had been de facto military allies with Taiwan in that period, and we also they were used quite extensively during the war in Indochina as an ally. Do congressmen visit? Yeah, Rick Scott visited, Tammy Duckworth visited, Robert Menendez, the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he visited unannounced, I should add. So it's not that they haven't come, but she has long-standing criticism of the Chinese government. She visited Tiananmen Square in 1991. She's a big, outspoken voice on China human rights abuses. And she visited Tiananmen Square when she was a representative in the House, when she first got elected. So that's to keep in mind. And then we got this issue of the Taiwan Travel Act that Trump signed into law in 2018. And then Alex Azar went and visited Taiwan in 2020. Pompeo had gone and visited, basically lifted U.S. government rules prohibiting interactions between U.S. diplomats and their Taiwanese diplomats. Remember, the CIA completely collaborates with the Chinese intelligence services. I'm talking about the Taiwanese. A long-standing relationship with them. And here Xi Jinping is basically in that phone call threatening the United States. And finally, I'm just going to show this op-ed piece. This is sort of interesting. This is from the Times today. And here is, it's a question of, well, do we have the back of Taiwan? This is by a fellow at Stanford. And she goes back to that comment in May where Biden basically, they freaked out about that comment. Oh, no, it's strategic ambiguity. And she's been involved in dozens of war games and tabletop exercises to see how a conflict would turn out. Simply put, the U.S. is outgunned. At the very least, a confrontation with China would be an enormous drain on the U.S. military without any assured outcome that America could repel all of China's forces. And that's a fact. Now, China has the largest navy in the world. We can get in specifics about that. Of course, it's a coastal navy predominantly. But their missile force is aimed at knocking out U.S. naval power, especially carriers. And there's only 2 bases within unrefueled combat radius of the Taiwan Strait. They're both in Japan, and you compare that with 39 air bases China has within 500 miles of Taipei. Then you have these Chinese carrier killer missiles. Now, this is sort of interesting. These are H-6 bombers with standoff missiles that they can launch, and they're designed to strike and destroy aircraft carriers. And they carry underneath there the largest air-launched missile in the world. A 33-meter long missile that's basically the DF-17 designed as a hypersonic warhead on the bottom of the H-6. So these missiles could be very effective at knocking out carriers. Remember, hypersonic carrier killer. All sorts of cyber warfare capabilities. And we know this. The United States knows this. China would only attack Taiwan and refrain from hitting American forces to avoid drawing on U.S. military might. This would allow the U.S. to bring forces into the region. Now, many years ago, I used to talk about that war game I was helping umpire down in Washington, where I was the People's Liberation Army commander. I sank 3 aircraft carriers of the U.S. Navy. And so I said, we had to stop the game. I said, what was the United States going to do with 3 carriers sunk? They're going to go to nuclear war. So that's the situation. And a study in 2018 warned that the United States could face a decisive military defeat in a war over Taiwan. Let's look what they're talking about here. So this is from the National Defense Strategy Commission that was done during the, I believe this is done during the Trump administration. But again, so that's where we have to sort of keep this in mind. So why do we want to, again, rocking the boat is not in our interest. The interest of the United States objectively is to, I personally think, to work out their differences with China and try to have China as a partner, not a foe. But anyway, that's my opinion. So what are the opinions of all you guys? What do you think about this situation with China?
Well, any kind of debacle with them, it's about satellites. At that scale where you've got missiles coming in literally over hundreds of kilometers and they're accurate, when you've got just a few aircraft carriers, there needs to be actions done against the Baidu system, which is a GPS system that the Chinese have got. That's why we got a space command now, and the importance of their mission in that situation can't be underestimated. It's critical. Now, obviously, there's a redundancy in these missiles. They can cope without necessarily getting satellite guidance, but they'll be a lot less capable. That's looking at it from a purely military point of view. As far as what you're saying is, we need to sit down with the Chinese and do it diplomatically and make sure that there are no hot buttons that either side pushes, and the typical diplomatic route. That's what we need to do. But on the other hand, there seems to be this issue of lifespans. It applies to Putin and applies to Xi Jinping. They got to get results before they kick the bucket, or before their dementia kicks in, right? So that's the problem with authoritarian states, autocracies. You've got an individual at the top, and so we may, just like Stalin, we may have to deal with the fact that when China thinks they're ready, even if we're not, they might cross the line, and the arguments have been when. I was always thinking 2027, but because of what Putin's done, maybe not, maybe later, maybe 2030, but still, the American public needs to, first of all depolarize itself and start to recognize that its hegemonic place in the world is not a guarantee, it's not a given, and that, young people in particular need to figure out where all these places are, because they will be very important for their existence. So it's coming down the pike, and it's going to come down hard. We need to have a coalition, obviously, with Japan, the rest of them, Australia, Philippines maybe, but definitely all the Asian states that have got so much to lose. Make sure that they stay on side. South Korea and Japan have got problems that needs to be resolved. Taiwan is obviously it needs to be given certain resources, technical resources that keep it up. Its generation of fighters needs to be such that they can handle whatever the Chinese come up with. But the Chinese are coming up with F-35 equivalents. That's not good. What they currently field isn't bad. Its Type 55 destroyers are good. They've got emails on the latest Fujian aircraft carrier. That's good. They're going to come out with a couple more. That's bad. So, when the kickoff date is going to be, I think depends on the military lineup at the time, not so much on diplomacy. So, you got to deal with it.
All right. Well, one thing, of course, that we talked about right from the start when this crisis was occurring in the fall, I'm talking now about the crisis in Europe, was its interrelationship with this situation. But Dennis, can you unmute? I would like to hear your opinion about this, Dennis. Dennis Goldstein, please unmute. All right. While we're waiting for Dennis to unmute, Michael, go on.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the problem with diplomacy is that China, again, has shown no respect, much less consideration, for the internal governmental processes or judicial processes or anything like that of any other country. So we saw this with Canada with the Hawaii situation where they attempted to put pressure on the judicial system in Canada. Now they're attempting to pressure the way the United States government works. That makes diplomacy problematic, basically because China is saying you either do things our way or else. And that is a problem. They also seem to be getting bent out of shape over symbolism at this point. China used to be far more pragmatic than they're being right now. Pelosi's visit can be at best, at most, considered a symbolic visit. And it probably isn't symbolic. Obviously, Biden's taken pains to make sure it isn't symbolic of a holistic approach by the United States government. The United States government as a whole, I should say. What they should be, might make them a little bit more concerned, is the USS Ronald Reagan and 2 amphibious ships are deployed somewhat nearby. And the amphibious ships are equipped with F-35s, I think 20 on each. I'm not sure. That could be considered provocative, but that may be, and again, the United States may just be doing that in response to China's military exercise / provocation, whatever you want to call it. But China right now is acting even more arrogant than the United States normally does, and that's saying a lot. I think Frank has hit something on the head also, which is that the coalition matters. Obviously, Japan, whatever Japan can put up, and a key player, obviously the UK and the Commonwealth. The key player of the Commonwealth in this respect being Australia, because of proximity, not necessarily because of their of what they can put out in terms of ships and planes, etc., but actually what they can do as far as basing what you might call the alliance or the allies, you want to call it that, the United States and the UK, the Commonwealth, Japan, etc. So that I would say, I don't know why China is considering how they behaved in the past, why they're getting again bent out of shape over what can be considered a vaguely symbolic visit. And again, they simply have to get past this whole thing of trying to make demands upon the political systems and as I said, judicial systems in the Canadian case, but about all the internal systems of other governments, and demanding that they behave the way they want them to behave or operate the way they want them to operate. So I don't know what's going to come out of this, except I would like to think, at least, that China will be at least still pragmatic enough to not make more out of this than is warranted.
Yeah, one of the reasons I bring it up is that obviously my motivation in doing this is to increase public awareness about the dilemmas we're in terms of this conflict going on in Ukraine, because the more it broadens out, the more one can see. And again, the analogies one has to be careful with, because are we indeed dealing with something that's similar to the world in 1939 or 1913 or etc.? But nevertheless, it's dangerous because one could easily make those analogies, and obviously, with a situation where Xi Jinping has decided, for all sorts of reasons, to align himself with Russia in this conflict in the Ukraine more and more. And now you have a situation where they're saying, let's see how Western will is in Ukraine and test it in this situation, which is to our advantage. This is the kind of stuff that makes this gets dangerous in terms of when do you see it spill over and escalate and get more complicated. And then, unfortunately, someone decides to shoot a nuke off, and then we are all in trouble. Dennis Goldstein, are you? Can you share your opinions about this? You need to unmute, Dennis. All right, let me go to Darryl. Darryl, your comments about all this.
I can appreciate everybody's concern, but once again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. And I totally agree, Jim. The longer that this war in Ukraine drags on, the more problematic it's going to be. So, two things with regard to the Madam Speaker's visit to Taiwan is, on the one hand, they're insisting she has to go because she said she was going to go. On the other hand, they're distancing themselves from her visit as if it's a private visit as compared to a state visit. A lot of dancing going on here. And I don't think the American population understands the ramifications one way or the other, in the context that the American population isn't given sufficient information or sources of information. So we appreciate what you're doing and at least posing these different quote unquote dilemmas. The war could be over tomorrow if the West decides that it needs to end tomorrow. I fail to understand. No, let me rephrase that. I think that the nuclear option is an excuse for the West to just continue letting this thing play out the way it's playing out. It's hard for me to understand how the West can afford to allow Russia to win, because I think it sets a very dangerous precedent. However, I'll be considerate, and if the nuclear threat is actually something to be respected, then once again, you've got those nuclear power plants that I don't see anybody really protecting to the necessity that they would need to be protected. I mean, there are a lot of things here that aren't being explained to the public as the public wrings its hands over the gas prices. So, and then all of a sudden people are going to be shocked that situations have developed that they weren't properly informed about. So I think there's a lot of stuff on the table. I think that most of the population in the United States has zero understanding of what all this means, other than it's plopped in front of them. And I think it really makes a difference how, quote unquote, facts are presented for a population to make wise decisions. So I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Now let me turn to the domestic situation.
Oh, can I just say something real quick?
Yeah, go on, Frank.
Okay. The next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, okay, is absolutely critical in Ukraine, because there are mindsets on both in the West and also in Ukraine. You know, this argument that from the Ukrainian point of view, they need more Western weapon systems. They do. But unfortunately, there are two strains to it. if they get more weapon systems, they can just sit down and look at the Russians and do what Americans do best, and that is kill without being killed. Okay. And that is a huge mistake. You can call them our proxies, whatever you want to call them. They have to succeed within the next, while the ground is still hard, before the rain season sets in, and then you get into winter, and then you got issues that are going to just start to mount up that cause Ukraine to be in a worse situation as time goes by, because the resilience of NATO countries will start to flag. It's inevitable, and we do not know what this midterm is going to deal, what kind of cards it's going to deal for this administration. So they have to do something within the next 2 weeks. They absolutely have to, and it means they've got to sacrifice soldiers to do it. And it's easy for me to say, but if they don't do it, if they think that they can get away with a protracted war because the West is going to continue to supply them with stuff, dream on. That may not happen. There's no guarantee of that at all. And so they need to act now. And this article here that you're just showing, it's like there's a shitload of things going wrong in this country too in the next month. August is a really critical month. That's my spiel.
All right, and Dennis, are you there? Okay. Just chime in, Dennis, when you want. Now, I'm going to show some op-ed pieces that have to do with domestic politics. This was sort of interesting because this is done by a professor at Georgetown. And he's talking about, okay, we're taking a summer break, but, he's doing the whole long summer, long delay kind of view of history that's been so trendy in the recent decades. But he's starting, of course, with the impact of Alito's draft majority opinion in Dobbs versus Women's Health Organization, which then led to the, when Roe v. Wade was overturned in June. But this was not the start. See, this is the whole thing that's important. There's a complete reactionary assault going on in the courts. And this has been advanced by this. There's many other decisions by the Supreme Court that have been going on that are quite significant besides that. Now, then, of course, you have the January 6th hearings going on, which are quite extraordinary. Now, the fifth hearing focused in on Trump's outrageous attempts to corrupt the Justice Department, when we had Barr there talking about when he said, to Trump, it's all a bunch of bullshit what you're talking about, that the election was a steal. But we saw that hearing, which was quite powerful. Again, what amount of the population watched the hearings? 20 million or something like that. And then the next day, on the 24th of June, that's when they published this attack on the abortion. And then there was other cases that were decided about the separation of church and state, the ability of states to regulate guns. Remember the decision here in New York State. And then another decision that tolerated racial gerrymandering, and another one that weakened the ability of the state to handle environmental problems. And then, of course, we have Cassidy Hutchinson come in on the 28th, who was probably the most important of the people coming forth, who gave intimate detail about what he was actually doing that day. And he just retreats to the dining room in the Oval Office and basically engages completely into pushing the situation that's going on Capitol Hill to his advantage as an active player. And now we're in a situation where they're talking about, are they going to refer this to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution? Today, you might notice that they had the longest sentence of anybody involved in the January 6th insurrection. A guy from the Texas 3%ers, he was sentenced for 7 years. His kids in front of the court today said basically Trump should go for life. If my dad is sentenced for 7 years, I think they wanted 14 years. He was a guy who actually was caught with a weapon, sidearm. And there are guys who are have much more serious charges against them. So they're saying, oh, this guy got 7 years. And then the kid basically said, well, Trump should get it for life if my father gets it for 7 years. And then you have, this op-ed piece goes on about what kind of crisis are we in. She has a quote here from Franz Kafka, writing in 1914. But here is an interesting conclusion. The current situation necessarily marks a turning point. It is a veritable crisis because it will have to be resolved one way or the other. America will either overcome this reactionary counter-mobilization and make the leap to multiracial, pluralistic democracy, or the country will regress and let democracy perish before it's even been fully achieved in this land. That's a pretty tough statement to make, by Thomas Zimmer. Now, there's another piece that appeared that also was pretty tough on what we're going through right now. And this is a piece that, for those of us my age, we are living in Richard Nixon's America. Escaping it won't be easy. And, they're talking about how basically the federal government, was involved, it sort of started with Trump, with injecting cash into the economy. $2.2 trillion is injected, similar to the New Deal. And this would allow us to have the biggest burst of progressive legislation since the 1960s. But then, of course, we didn't have it happen. And here's a pretty powerful comment. We're not living in FDR's country, or Johnson's, or Trump's, or even Biden's. We're living in Richard Nixon's. And what is he saying here? The core message of Richard Nixon in 1968. When a nation with the greatest tradition of the rule of law is torn apart by lawlessness, when a nation which has been the symbol of equality of opportunity is torn apart by racial strife, then it's time for a new leadership in the United States of America. And there it is, the fusion of crime, race, and fear that Nixon believed would carry him to the presidency, and indeed did. Mr. Law and Order, if you recall. Now, during that year, there was the ruling on school integration, which led to all these busing controversies. And Nixon tells key supporters that if he were elected, he would only nominate justices who would oppose the court's progressivism. But on the August night he accepted the Republican nomination, he did a colorblind comment. To those who say that law and order is the code word for racism, here is a reply. Our goal is justice for every American. Well, it didn't work out that way. He passed two crime bills, the ominous crime bills, laced with provisions targeting racial, poor black communities. The war on drugs was laid out, a racialized war on drugs, and the Criminal Code of Washington, D.C., which was the issue of no-knock warrants, were authorized and legitimized, and that allowed judges to impose dangerous sentences and impose mandatory minimum sentences on those convicted of crimes, violent crimes. Now, we talked yesterday about the whole question of prison systems. LBJ spent $20 million to aid police departments and prison systems. In his last 2 years of office, Nixon sent $3 billion. And up went departments' purchase. Again, they always makes me laugh. They always refer to what happens in the police departments these days with heavy weapons being turned over. Well, people forget that happened at that time after Nixon became president. And up went the prison population of the country by 16%, while the black share of the newly incarcerated reached its highest level in 50 years. Then he reached into the Supreme Court. His predecessors, Eisenhower got Warren. He always regretted having Warren. But he chooses Warren Burger. And then he decides to go to, he had two different judges who at one point either expressed opposition to the integration of the races or whose rulings were regarded as favoring segregation. You can remember those people he tried to get on the Supreme Court. And then he fell back on Harry Blackmun, a centrist, who actually was, and remember, there was a Southerner, if you recall, he tried to sneak on the Supreme Court, who had been a member of the KKK. I remember all that vividly. And then he picked two nominees in September 71. He picked Lewis Powell, and he picked William Rehnquist. And these two, and Rehnquist was pretty smart. They laid these principles of increasingly energized legal conservatism. Now, the Burger Court may be viewed because part of the Nixon test did not include abortion. But by 71, abortion politics was furiously contested. And in polling, among whites, men were slightly more likely than white to support the right to choose. The non-Catholic, college-educated more likely than those without college degrees, et cetera, et cetera. But 3 of the 4 white Protestant men Nixon had put in the court voted for Roe v. Wade. And then you had these issues of Justice Blackmun. Nixon sends a letter to Cardinal O'Connor in New York, offering his admiration and support for the church and for stepping in and defending the rights of the unborn. And then you had all the war on drugs continue with Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, Bush's Crime Control Act of 1990, Bill Clinton's crime bill to broken windows, etc. And so Trump, of course, made a speech just a few days ago, last week, where he said that if we don't have safety, we don't have freedom. America first must mean safety first, and we need an all-out effort to defeat violent crime in America and strongly defeat it. And be tough, and be nasty, and be mean if we have to. So here we go back to, again, the fusion of Richard Nixon's race, crime, and fear. And there's a pretty strong statement. Kevin Boyle, who teaches at Northwestern, until Nixon's version of law and order is purged from American public life, we're going to remain locked into the nation he built on its appeal, its future shape, as so much of its past has been by its racism and fear. So again, Dennis, are you there? Dennis Goldstein. All right, Darryl, what's your response to those two pieces?
The gentleman in January 6th gets, what was it, 7 years?
7 years, yeah.
And Matula Shakur is getting ready to die of bone cancer and dementia after serving 39 years. And is already 6 years past his max. This country needs to really, really study its own history and understand what this is all about and what's going on here. So the history would tell you that this is the freest democracy that's ever existed for all times. That's what they keep telling me, and I have yet to experience it. They keep having to pass laws just so I can walk down the street. So today, or I guess it was yesterday, the African Society for Socialism is raided by the FBI. The leader is handcuffed. The computers are seized. Why? Because they have Russian connections. This is America. Somebody needs to, I need to be doing more study. I've never even heard of these people. And yet, if this is the priority under the Biden administration, what happens in 2023, 2024? If you think that the Justice Department is going to do anything about President Donald Trump, I think you're pretty delusional, because they still haven't showed his taxes. Maybe the Georgia case will net something. I think that this country is in very, very serious condition right now. And unless people are able to address the people who think that President Donald Trump is still the president, you're going to have a really, really challenging problem. And you don't need the Russians and the Chinese to provoke a very ugly situation going on right here. Who has the weapons? Who's going to defend those that need to be defended? I believe the New York City Police Department has an $11 billion budget right now. How many guns are in the city? What's the drug count in the city? Chelsea's thinking about hiring private security guards. Chelsea is the area in New York on the western part of Manhattan, 23rd Street, I don't know, 14th to 23rd Street, and they have to hire private security guards because of the open drug use and sexual activity. Something going on here with the money and the supposed defensive communities that isn't happening. And in 2022, with the amount of information available about how you heal people from broken situations mentally, physically, we're not using those. We're not using that information in order to affect the population. We're using the same scare tactics that you were just speaking about during the Nixon administration. And when it comes to the administration of, in quotes, justice, well, in my lifetime, it's become just us, meaning people of African descent and his Latinx descent primarily, because I remember watching the prison movies from the 30s and 40s and even into the 50s. We wasn't there in the numbers that we're there now. And so either something really radical has happened that the European community needs to share with the rest of us, or straight up operation out of the CIA and company to make sure that some have and some don't. Unfortunately, it's spreading to people of European descent. And when opiate use rose in the European community in the United States of America, oh, it was a medical problem. That wasn't Nixon's quote back in the 70s. So I suggest we all take those history lessons really seriously.
Well, Jim, if you're not going to jump in, I am. I did want to say something about Alito's speech, which was that in which he actually gave this this talk to a conservative organization and actually said, I mean, in other words, besides his wimpy complaints about what people outside the country, you know, about what Prince Harry was saying or something actually is inside the country. But everybody was focusing on that. What was the most disturbing was he actually said, in I would consider no uncertain terms, that his decision on Roe v. Wade was based on the defense of religion, not religious freedom, but religion. And therefore, he basically said his decision on Roe v. Wade was in violation of the Constitution, of the United States Constitution, that he is supposed to not just uphold, but interpret. So that's a dangerous situation. Basically, he admitted that that his interpretation of the Constitution was selective at best and criminal in all probability. Also, I agree with Darryl with everything you're saying. I'll go further. I think that one of the weak links, the greatest danger to the United States of America has always been the racism that's inherent in it, and we still have that. It's in, shall we say, I don't even know. I guess a few years ago I would have said it was less virulent than in the past, but I don't know anymore. But it does take the form also of white privilege, which is the fact that white people shouldn't be treated, or should be treated better or given more rights than people who aren't white. And this is, I don't know what the hell has to be done in this country as far as the educational system, as far as people's thinking, but the racism seems to be so embedded that even it's even virulent. I mean, to me, it seems as if it's as virulent as it was from the inception of this country. So that is a major problem. And also the thing about Nixon and the law and order thing, I don't know if I find it strange that if they are following this, egregious law and order, project that's going on here, this tendency towards an overemphasis, let's say, on law and order, and that how does that fit in with Trump and his supporters, who obviously only believe in the law and the order that suits them and what they want to do, but they don't believe in the concept of law and order. Otherwise, wouldn't have January 6th or anything Trump's done for his entire adult life, which is in violation of the idea of law and order. And justice, forget it. As far as justice goes, when the Supreme Court is basically, or certain members on the Supreme Court, about 5 of them, are basically destroying the legitimacy of the Supreme Court by decisions that are not only biased, not only political, but arrogantly so, unapologetically so. I don't know. This country is at a crucial point, but to say that it might turn around in August, or we have to deal with it, I don't think we'll be able to deal with it in August. I think terms are going to have a lot to do with it, and we just got an uphill battle.
All right. Well, what I want to bring up here is the interrelationship between this case that both Dennis and Darryl have mentioned, and this indictment in Tampa. This is the United States of America versus Alexander Viktorovich Ionov. And what they're declaring in this indictment, this is filed on July 26th, is that Mr. Ionov is, they say he's a founder of the anti-globalization movement of Russia. But they're also talking about this being an FSB operation. And it being an FSB operation, remember, we're in a situation of quasi-conflict with Russia. And one can, some people on the left want to denigrate the issue of Russian interference in the election 2016. I buy it, because I think it would be serving Putin's national interest to have somebody like Trump elected, which he, remember, they celebrated when he was elected in Moscow. And what Ionov is talking about is that in this indictment, they talk about different groups that they help finance. And one of the groups, political group number 1, is indeed this group that was raided by the FBI. So what they're accusing the group of is being essentially, it sort of reminds you of the FBI acting in the 1930s against the Nazis or the Italian fascist elements in the United States, like the Bund, that they are essentially, that a group like this that's aligned itself and been financed by Russia is acting as an agent of Russia. And so that's going to be an interesting little situation, but I recommend the indictment to be read. I'm going to read it tonight, and then we can sort of talk about it more tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting, but the case is interesting because I know we're going to be asked to defend these people, and I'm going to bring it up. I said read the indictment. It's a sort of interesting little problem there. Now, I'd like to Frank.
Question.
Jim,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. I mean, in other words, they're claiming that this group are agents of Russia being manipulated.
Correct.
Yeah, but that's minor compared to what Donald Trump was doing, or Josh Hawley, or anything.
Very
like
good
this.
point. Very good point. Very good point.
We don't know how minor it is until we know.
Well, but that's a very good point, because look at the context. We're back to classic Cold War stuff, because I know people who.
Well, let me just say something. I haven't said anything.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things going on that suggest the hidden hand of Russia.
Right.
First of all, in Bulgaria, a ammunition depot blew up. Okay. Serbia has just, in support of the Serbian minority in Kosovo, started to, I think there was an attack there. So these are issues that can be manipulated by Russia, and anything they can do under these circumstances, dire circumstances they're in, they will do. And so this does not surprise me at all. And you talk about the Nixon period, well, you got to talk about the Cold War. That's real. It was real, and what was happening here was real. Vietnam was real. We lost in Vietnam. That was real. And what subsequently happened? We had an army that fell apart. We had many things that fell. There was a drug situation here that was off the scale. Okay, some of these things you can't lay at the feet of the Soviet Union back then, but some of them you can. So what's going on now is not just internally. I mean, I was listening to Hard Talk today, and the opponent of Ramaphosa of the ANC is talking about Zuma. He's talking to Zuma and how, Zuma's going to go to trial, but it's the white people are at fault. It's white people. And Ramaphosa is part of this elite. Again, he's using Marx. The Ramaphosa's people are all elitists, and they're all part of a class. And of course, the white people, the Boers, are the evil ones. So, there's racism there, and there's racism here, and it goes across the board. And
well, Frank.
Can I say something here?
Frank, South Africa was a little more complicated than that, because...
Well, I know it's more complicated, but that's what this guy was saying.
ANC, yeah, I know, but you have splits in the ANC, you have splits in the liberation movement in South Africa that carried over into the post-apartheid period. And
but this is a militant argument.
Yeah, I know, but the issue of the attacks on white farm, I mean, this is what the argument is now. I know. No, the argument was back then too. The argument was back then
we don't care about what's happening. It's what's happening now.
Mandela was a bridging leader who kept those kind of conflicts under control.
So what? That's back then. We're talking about now. This is what's happening now. And we're talking about racism in this country, and we're talking about a GOP that is split.
All right.
Split down the wrong way.
All right. Well, I don't want to get Well, let's leave South Africa alone. Now, here's the leader of this African People's Socialist Party, and the FBI in this indictment. This is, just to give you the source here, this is called Towards Freedom. So I assume it's a lefty kind of blog. And there's not
Dennis
only...
posted.
Yeah,
Dennis posted something.
Dennis posted this. Now, not only is this group being targeted, the African People's Socialist Party, but they're also identifying the indictment other groups besides that. So they're arguing here, anyone who opposes U.S. imperialism or has made common cause internationally is endangered. Not surprisingly, a black organization is the first on the hit list. And then they raid the home of this. I'd never heard of these people.
You can guarantee that QAnon and on the right are also being funded by China. And it makes perfect sense for them to do that. If they're not doing it, it makes no sense, actually. It makes no sense for intelligence organizations in those countries not to fund extremists.
Oh, no, exactly. But don't you remember that they finally discovered who the idiot who was writing the QAnon stuff was? They finally tracked him down. And it turns out, I remember laughing my ass off because some investigative reporter finally figured out who the guy was. And it wasn't who he said it was. It was all a bunch of nonsense he's been making up. And yet he's created all these people. It's like, anyway. So suddenly you're supposed to become tools like black people don't have minds of their own to find out what reality is and who's responsible for it. It's white people doing self-criticism, uniting to get money. That's where the money's coming from, Uncle Sam. And And now you have, so this is him making a comment about, and then of course, he is not in agreement with the policy of the United States. This is this leader of this party, and he does this live stream. This is going to be interesting to watch, this live stream press conference. Let's see what the hell this was all about.
It was on Pacifica today.
It was interesting.
Yep.
Where the whole damn thing?
No. They did an excerpt, and he said I didn't take any money, but I would be more than happy to take money from anybody who's willing to fund me.
Yeah, here we go. Let's hear what he has to say.
I mean, I don't have access to a copy or whatever. Yeah. I'm afraid that.
That sounds like I'm giving a red cable on social media. I'm not gonna attack. Share.
Well, the media is there in force. Look at that.
I didn't see any major networks.
Oh no! Look at that! Look at that! There's all these. Look at all the cameras there.
Once again, I didn't see any major networks.
Oh well, look.
Did it make the news this evening?
I don't know. We'll find out. Let's just see
count
what they
to
have
10
to
so
say.
they can test their audio.
1, 2, 3,
I'm good.
4. All right. Uhuru. My name is Akile Anai, and I'm the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party. I want to appreciate the media for uniting to be a part of this press conference that we're having right now at the St. Petersburg Police Department headquarters, where they just finalized their press conference, which we were not allowed to be a part of. I guess public presence was not allowed to participate in this press conference. Neither were questions from the media. But we're here because we want to explain what this is about, what the FBI, what the police have stated as the basis for, this so-called investigation. We want to clarify several things. One, that what happened this morning when my car and my personal property was seized from my possession. One, they attacked Chairman Amalia Shatella and Deputy Chair Onizanaia Shatella in St. Louis, Missouri, where our current headquarters is for the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru Movement, when they broke into their homes and they handcuffed our leadership when they went into the Uhuru House here in St. Petersburg, Florida, without issuing a search warrant when they broke down the doors. So we want to say that they are characterizing this as some kind of investigation into our affiliation with, Russian foreign governments and things like that. But one, I think that this exposes the crisis that the U.S. imperialism is in. Because the U.S. and other world colonial powers have been collaborating against Russia for early into the early 1900s. And this is a consequence right now in 2022 that we see the same attack against Russia. And right now, this war with Ukraine, this defensive war in Ukraine that Russia is actually waging against world colonial powers, not Ukraine as a single entity, but the U.S. and all colonial powers who have an interest in colonially dominating African people right here in this country and around the world and extracting resources from the majority of peoples on the planet. That system, this current system, is in severe crisis and it cannot rule in the same old way.
Right.
So that's what we understand, one, about the U.S. government. And the ruling class itself states that imperialism is on the decline. U.S. power is not cyclical, but it is permanent. So that's number one. Number two, the African People's Socialist Party is an organization that has been here for 50 years. It is an international organization that not organizes just here in St. Petersburg, Florida, but right there in St. Louis, Missouri, in Oakland, California, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and all throughout the U.S., in Africa, in Europe. And the history of the African People's Socialist Party is to unite with any forces that unite with the anti-colonial struggle. And we feel that is a just struggle. We feel that every colonized African who dumbed down in the city of St. Peter, anywhere else
You
in
need to
this
stay,
country,
Frank.
like George Floyd or like Mike Brown, we feel that our response is to fight against
See what I'm
that
talking about, Jim?
relationship. Our responsibility is to fight against our oppression and our domination. And that means organizing a revolutionary capacity to make that possible. And that means that we unite with any force, because we understand that colonialism is a global system and that it has interests everywhere throughout the world. Everywhere that they are talking about we have a relationship with, the U.S. is there right now plundering people's resources, but they are not under investigation. Just a few weeks ago, the Uhuru House was attacked in broad daylight, where an arsonist came to the Uhuru House and burned down and attempted to burn our red, black, and green flag that waves at our offices down. There was no FBI investigation into that person who tried to burn down our flag. There was no response from the FBI and the St. Pete Police Department to respond to this attack that came against our Uhuru House. And we also understand that that's not a coincidence, that the only revolutionary organization that's done something here on the ground practically for African people is the one that's come under attack. The institution that offers a community radio station, a newspaper, a commercial kitchen, an Aquaba Hall rental space, and community office for our organizers, that was the building that has come under attack. And in St. Louis, where we have incredible economic projects that have transformed the conditions of our community. Not the U.S. government, no politician ever did that for our community, but it was us, the Uhuru movement, that made that possible. And today, this process is disrupting a meeting that we're supposed to have around initiating a project, the African Women Doula Project, that can make it possible for African women to deliver babies safely in our community. This process is interrupting that as I speak. And what this is a propaganda campaign against Russia. In that press conference where I have my ear pressed to the door, they are talking about interference in local elections and social media. No, I'll tell you, it's Mark Zuckerberg that interferes with the ability for people to communicate with one another and express their genuine interests. That's who was at the security conference for the U.S. government. It's Mark Zuckerberg who's responsible for that. And the U.S. is attempting to explain its own contradictions with Russia because it cannot rule in the same old way. It does not have the unity of its entire population. That's what Trump represented. And they say it was Russia intervention in the elections. They say it's an undemocratic process. What does the U.S. know about genuine democracy when it takes the ability for African people to feed, clothe, and house ourselves on a daily basis? You want to talk about destabilization? Talk to Nicaragua, talk to Venezuela, talk to Cuba, talk to Russia, and ask about undemocratic processes. That's what we're engaged in right now. And they are attempting to attack this organization. They are attempting to isolate the Black Power movement. That's what they are attempting to do. And we can have relationships with whoever we want, whoever we see fit possible to make this revolution possible. We will have a relationship with them.
It sounds like you're not denying working with Mr. Ivanov and the Russian government. You're not denying that?
Look, they're raiding our properties as we speak. Whatever you want to know, they'll let you know what we have and what we have not done. But I will say this, that we unite with any force that is willing to unite in our anti-colonial struggle. And that part is clear. We will not refuse to engage with others around the world who want to see this system go. We will not refuse that. That's what I'll say about that.
If you are working with the Russian government, we're not concerned at all that
the U.S. is working with every colonial government in the world, and nobody is saying a damn thing about what the U.S. is doing in Africa. What they don't raid the homes and ask white people any questions after they come back from Israel, where they're murdering Palestinian people every single day. They don't flash bomb their homes. They don't send the police there, even though they went into international waters in a place where they are killing Palestinians on a daily basis. Nobody is asking them any questions about their affiliation. The U.S. is affiliated with all the undemocratic forces around the world attempting to oppress African and other colonized people.
Why not register as a foreign agent?
Why would we register as a foreign agent? We recognize that this is illegitimate settler colony, that the only foreigners here are Europeans themselves who came here and stole this indigenous land at gunpoint. That's who needs to register as a foreign alien or whatever. It's the U.S. government.
Are you unindicted co-conspirator number 4?
What's the state? Because they didn't give us any of that
okay,
paperwork.
just so you know.
You want to know my name?
Unindicted co-conspirator 4, whose identity is known to the grand jury, was a United States citizen residing in St. Petersburg and the director of agitation and propaganda.
I stated my name is Akila Anai. I'm the director of agitation and propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party. I ran for office in 2017 and 2019 on the platform of reparations, the first time that was ever done in this country. Under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. It was the African People's Socialist Party that did that campaign.
Did you accept Russian money? Did you accept Russian money from your
See my public records and the donors that came through that we have to report publicly.
It's a yes or no.
See
Did
that?
you accept Russian
Check
money?
their public records. You want to be a part of the state's investigation? You check their public records and see what resources we accept.
It's a yes or no. Did you accept Russian money as part of your campaign?
You are trying to make this discussion about something that it is not. You want to know what this real problem is about? If you are genuinely interested to know what this situation is about, not looking fancy land about whether or not I accepted money from Russians, this is real. Not the way you want to see it, not the way you want to control the narrative. What I'm talking about right now is that they're using Russia as a part of a propaganda tool against the people to turn you away, to win, first of all, win your unity with the U.S. government. The U.S. government has no ability to answer any of your questions. None. It can't solve any of your problems, and they tell you that it's Russia's fault. Russia is not in your community causing you to starve. Russia is not in your community pushing you out. Russia is
I
not
have
the
to say
same
that
police
I've
department
just
that
about
killed
heard
Darryl
enough of
in
this.
1996. It was not Russia. It was the U.S. government that did that.
Yeah,
Are you
okay.
concerned about being arrested yourself?
I am not concerned about what the crisis of imperialism and how it will act. No, I'm not.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm like really late for all this stuff. Because this seems like a lot, right?
Yeah,
It's going on right now. And it is.
It started 600 years ago.
Yeah, so what exactly is the FBI accusing you guys of?
They are accusing us of this is what they're making it about. And I want to be clear, this is what they're making it about. Because the African People's Socialist Party has been here for 50 years. And this is not the first time we've come under any kind of assault, FBI investigation, or anything like that. This will always be the case as we try to fight for our freedom, because African freedom comes at the expense of U.S. interests. That's just how that goes. And a couple years ago, they labeled Africans who would struggle in their own interests as black identity extremists. They have terrorist designations for people like us who want to fight for our freedom. So I want to make that clear, that this is what they're saying it's about, but they need an entry point to be able to attack our movement, and this is the one that they're using. But they are accusing us of conspiring with the Russian government for, I can't even tell you because it don't really make that much sense. You know what I'm saying? So this is what they are accusing us of conspiring with the Russian government, and for whatever purposes and interest they have not explained. But I guess this comes at the expense of U.S. democracy, which isn't that very democratic.
So what is next for you? Do you get an attorney? What is the next couple of days and weeks look like as they tell us the investigation continues?
Well, we keep with our position. We continue doing what we've always done, which is organize our community towards African revolution. And we organize a response to this, just like we have in this response right now. Just like we're able to put out and define what this struggle is about. That's what we'll continue to do. And we'll continue to organize as necessary around whatever they try to drill down the pipeline. Like I said, this isn't the first time, our first go-around with the FBI. So we are prepared, to take it where it needs to go, to the full length of however long this investigation lasts. We will organize around it. And that's another thing. You touch me, you touch the African People's Socialist Party, you touch Chairman Amalia Shatella, you touch Deputy Chair Ornstein Shatella, any member of the African People's Socialist Party, you touch a member of the African nation. This is an international organization. We have bases throughout the world. So you don't just touch an individual, you touch an entire organization, and you touch an entire people who are counting on this movement right here to lead us to freedom.
But why work with Russia, who is a known U.S. adversary? Why work with them and be unregistered? Why take their money? Why work with Russia?
Did I ever say I took any money? See, no.
That's what they're accusing.
That's what I'm accused of. Right. I never said that, so don't put that in my mouth. I didn't say that.
Did you take money from Russia?
Look, I don't want to answer your question because you want to take it somewhere, and I don't want to.
I just want a yes or no if you took money from Russia.
I will let them tell it. That's the people you believe. That's the people you believe. But you want to ask any question about why we would affiliate ourselves with anybody that is willing to unite with the anti-colonial struggle? That's what your question is.
I'm asking why Russia, why a U.S. adversary that we've had issues with in the past. Why work with them?
Because I don't identify with you and the U.S. government. I don't identify with that.
Do you hate the government, the U.S. government?
I detest the U.S. government and what it does to African people on a daily basis. That's what we are here for, because we refuse to allow the system anymore to take the lives of African people. That is a logical thing for me to do.
You do understand what the indictment is about unregistered co-conspirators. I mean, you understand what they're doing.
I understand what they are saying this is about, and I'm telling you what it's about for real, in the real world. Not how not how you want to see the world, but what it actually is. This is happening in the context of Russia at war with Ukraine. This is happening in the context of our building being potentially burned down. This is happening in that context.
And do you think, is Russia, are they the good guys in the war against Ukraine? Do you think, from your perspective, like who's the good guy, who's the bad guy?
Russia, we are in support of Russia, I'll say that. African People's Socialist Socialist Party, and that's been public.
Why would you
That's been
support?
public.
I want to understand. I'm asking
You're
to
trying to
understand.
understand.
Right. Why would you support a larger country invading a sovereign country?
Because you
killing
don't know the
innocent
history.
people?
You don't know the history. You don't know the history of Ukraine and Russia, and you don't know that Ukraine is just a cover for the world colonial powers. You don't understand that. That's why we are against world colonial powers. That's what we are against. And if Russia is against world colonial powers, then we support Russia. That's
The indictment accuses the Uhuru movement of hosting a virtual video conference with a Russian national. Can you speak to that?
That is available online at Bernie's TV on YouTube. That webinar is available. Yes.
You know this guy. You know Alexander.
She just said it. We've had this discussion.
How many people were there when you hosted that event?
This is a virtual discussion, so it's virtual.
Will you continue to work with Russia, or at this point, based on this, do you have
We
to
will
like?
continue to work with any force that supports the anti-colonial African revolution. We'll work with it.
Is it possible they're using you?
The African People's Socialist Party is an organization
is it
that's been
possible
here for
Russia
50
is
years.
using? I'm just asking you.
No, because it's a backwards question. Because it presupposes that African people don't have the capacity to lead and struggle ourselves, but we do. And Chairman Amalia Shatella founded this organization over 50 years ago, and which created the capacity for the African working class to determine our own future. Russia don't determine Africa. Nobody else determines Africa but African people ourselves. And that is an insulting question. The African People's Socialist Party stands on its own and is able to make determinations for itself, which we've been doing for the last 50 years.
So
who did you support in the 2020 election?
I didn't support in the 2020 election, in the presidential election.
Yes.
Well, there wasn't anybody speaking to my interests, and when nobody saying reparations to African people, nothing. So ain't nobody get my vote.
But in theory, there are groups you would say no to, right?
There are groups we would say no to that would work against the interests of our community and our people in the struggle. Yes, we would say absolutely no. We would say no to the Democratic Party. We would say no to the Republican Party. We would say no to the Green Party. We would say no to these forces that work against or try to maintain the social system. So yeah, we can't say no.
What is the status of your chairman?
We don't even have the indictment, so we have no idea. We have, this is.
Ever cross your mind that this was maybe a bad idea? That this could happen. I mean, we're talking when you're talking to Russia and you know what's going into.
You really gotta know history, because when you see the Black Power movement of the 1960s, what happened to the Panthers and what happened to Africans who were organizing during that time, they got gunned down, they were thrown in prison. All these kinds of things happened to our struggle, and I voluntarily joined this struggle, recognizing that this is the history of what this government does to a people that struggles for freedom, that struggles for true democracy. This is what it does to the people. So, no, I did not enter this work being afraid or thinking that this was a bad decision. I follow the leadership of Chairman Amalia Shatella and African nationalism, and it does not steer me wrong.
So there was never a concern that this might have, again, working with a foreign adversary.
It doesn't matter what we do.
And you're not willing to say that you did not take money from them.
I'm not willing to say anything without my lawyer.
But you may have taken money.
I'm not willing to say anything without my lawyer. I will not refer to.
What is the status of your chairman? He was arrested today?
No, he was not arrested.
Not arrested.
He was put in handcuffs as well as our deputy chairman of the nation tells us.
Okay. Have they been released from handcuffs?
Yes, they were released from handcuffs.
And I'm sorry, was that St. Pete or St. Louis?
This is St. Louis, where our party is currently headquartered.
Did it used to be headquartered in St. Peter?
It did. Yes. Why didn't you move up to St. Louis? Because we found a more strategic base right there in St. Louis. So we have, we have a presence all over places, every region in the U.S. We have leadership, but the most strategic leadership right now is in the center of the U.S., which is St. Louis.
What has the FBI said to you? Have they told you anything besides the press conference?
No, they gave me that. No, they didn't tell me about the press conference either. They didn't say nothing to us. We came here, we couldn't even get in the press conference. Had to have our ear to the door to even get, to know what was being heard. So we haven't heard anything.
It's not concerned. We're trying to influence elections and essentially, on some level, take the vote away from just average citizens. They were trying to put their thumb on the scale.
All the time and intervenes. And
We're not talking about the U.S. We're talking about.
That's what I am though. You want to make it about Russia and think that Russia's the big bad guy that intervenes in local elections or something like that. When the U.S. government has this practice, it's an historic practice where the U.S. government takes elected officials that the people put into office and destabilizes that government.
Right. That's another. I mean, but at the end of the day, that's another story.
No, it's not. It's directly connected. You want to know. You want to see that story, but it's exactly the same.
I understand your point. I'm not even disputing what your point is.
You can't possibly understand my point.
I do. But I guess what I'm saying is, they're accusing the Russian government of working with you all to influence.
Campaign that's being waged against Russia to make Russia the big bad guy, when it's the U.S. government that has had this reign on the entire world for all this time. This is what you want to make it about. Russia's the big bad guy. Russia's the problem. Russia is not in my community doing any of this stuff to me. It's not the reason why me as an African woman is catching hell. It's not responsible for that. And that's what we have to make clear. That's what we have to make clear.
Can you spell your name for us too, so we have that correct?
Yes, it's A-K-I-L-E, last name A-N-A-I.
And who is the leader again?
Omali Yeshitela.
And can you spell that person's name as well?
O-M-A-L-I, last name Y-E-S-H-I-T-E-L-A.
And is this morning the first you've heard of this? Is like the first time you're hearing about this?
Well, I mean, I was approached this morning at 6 a.m., so that would be the first I've heard about it.
Yeah, they didn't give you calls ahead of time or anything?
No, they did not. Actually, they lured me out of my house under false pretenses. My car got broken into. They did. They were doing the breaking in. The police and the FBI.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Wow, well, that was sort of a heavy. That was sort of heavy to come
Jim.
across. Yeah, wow, that was heavy, man.
Jim.
I mean, wow. Go on.
She's stuck in 1968. Somebody's got to tell her that Russia is no longer communist or socialist, for that matter.
That wasn't her point.
I know what a point is, and I've heard that kind of point before. And I know plenty of people like that. People that are friends of mine, everything like that. But she's,
Michael, explain her point to me then.
Her point is she's coming from this anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, Marxist. It's a very Marxist viewpoint. Well, not exactly Marxist, but very Marxist revolutionary viewpoint that is against, the way the United States. No doubt that she hits on points that the United States is guilty of. There's no doubt in my mind. But I see that. I mean, I've heard it before, and I know people like that. And if she is like the people that I have known, she sounds like the people I've known like that, then the whole racism thing is being exploited to serve the purpose of the revolution. And again, they're revolutionaries all over. She's not the best one I've ever heard. You're having a press conference about an FBI break-in, the FBI's arrest of her leaders, and she used that as a platform for her to give the political platform of the group. In doing so, it sounds like she didn't admit that they took money, but she did admit that they welcomed Russian influence or something, which is the case against them. She hurt their legal case. I don't think they care about that. I'm sure they're willing to go to jail if necessary. But I'm sorry, this is a group that a long time ago, when I was younger, would have had a lot more influence than it would now. They're not that influential. And why the FBI was even went after them, except as a means perhaps to get more information on the Russian operative. Why they were going after him. This is a fringe group, very fringe group. They weren't doing anything violent, apparently. Their only crime, their crime wasn't violent. They weren't doing anything. They're talking about insurrection, so to speak. In a sense, but they weren't doing anything in terms of insurrection. So why the FBI? Again, it goes to my question, which is that why bothering? I mean, I just have no patience for her rant and everything like that. But why the FBI is going after that group, which is not even a blip on a radar screen, and not going after the people that are actually being manipulated or being used or willingly used by Russia, or working in concert with Russia against the United States, and people who are in political office, I don't know. Except the only thing I can think of is the FBI is trying to show that they're working across the board.
But
all right, Michael, let Darryl, what do you think about what you just heard?
Well, I haven't seen anybody break into the Proud Boys office. You know, here we go again, right? All I keep seeing is Fred Hampton and Mark Clark,
right,
laying in some bed somewhere, drugged, unable to defend themselves, even if that was possible. So I'm unclear as to what this is all about, other than it's Florida, and you got a lot of freelancers going on. It is of no importance whether they back the poor, oppressed Russian government as it defends itself through invasion. I'm not down with that, but I'm down with what the woman is saying with regard to what's happening here now. Once again, I pointed out, New York City has an $11 billion police budget. It's unable to secure its transportation. It's unable to secure and provide food and housing for people who are troubled, so they're acting out on the street. It's unable to educate its children, and that's to cut the budget. I don't understand that in the richest democracy in the world. I don't understand why you have to keep passing laws so that people can walk down the street without being accosted by the authorities. In that set of decisions by the Supreme Court, Jim, there was one in which if you work for a company and it's decided that arbitration is the way, well, you can't go to court. Indigenous people in their own land, which used to be called Indian Territory, now have to submit to the government of Oklahoma.
Right, right.
I mean, you've got a whole lot of stuff going on here.
Right.
And the FBI is arresting, as you say, a 50-year-old legacy group stuck in the 60s. Well, damn it, I think we should all go back to the 60s if that's what's required in order to get some semblance of paying attention to the working class in this country, because no one's really paying attention. And by the way, because you gave people food and sustenance during the 2-year semi-lockdown, that's why we have inflation. Oh, please, come on. Help me understand the economics of this, right? Why in the richest country in the world you have half the population, 40 million children going to bed hungry?
All right.
You know,
it's funny.
Oh,
It's
wait,
funny.
question. Just a question. Who was the one that said that because of the money given away during COVID, that's why we have inflation?
That was the Republican Party and Larry Summers.
Yeah, there have been all these arguments for that.
Okay, all right.
We frankly, we should devote an entire going viral on the inflation issue. I think that would be worthwhile. You know, really do the homework and really sit there and go into the issue. It's pretty late. I was going to play something else, but I didn't realize we're going to unexpectedly come across a situation by the FBI, which essentially is a manifestation of dealing with what they feel is a domestic security threat induced by the FSB, and we can argue about all of it we want, but it's fascinating to me to see this actually happen. The WBA-LSB board is being asked to pass a resolution defending these people, so it'll probably go up to the national board too, so I'm glad we were able to watch it tonight. Well, anyway, I want to thank both Darryl, Michael, Dennis. Frank unfortunately left. Alex would have been here if he'd been here. It would have been interesting to have his perspective. This was the August 2nd update on the Ukraine. I want to thank everybody for participating. Stay tuned. We'll keep on churning them out. Thank you.